Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first semifinals of the Afreeca duos here at the Afreeca TV channel of EGC TV. We have YUIMetal and LoueMT in the cold colors to the east, and to the north it is going to be PuppyPaw and LaSh. I'm of course Lidakor. Joining me is the lovely TenFourTim. You said this in the pregame, you think LaSh and PuppyPaw has the advantage, but here in this matchup we do have a mirror. It is the Ottomans and it is the Delhi for both teams.
Yeah, so this is going to be basically in this first game, it's going to feel like this is going to set the tone for the rest of the game, for the rest of the games going forward in this best of five, if it does end up going 5. Now, for both of these teams, obviously it is a mirror with Delhi and Ottomans. Look at where these Delhi players have spawned, and I talked a little bit about it while we were waiting for the game to start, but Louis and PuppyPaw both on that eastern side, right next to each other, and Lidakor, we have docks right next to each other as well.
All the focus will be towards this middle area. You see spearmen coming out for both teams. It is the Ottoman military schools working already. And a lot will come down to that spearman micro, as you said. You have all these docks concentrated in the middle. Whoever takes a good fight maybe manages to pick off a spearman. That will have the advantage in the middle, and that could easily snowball into just being able to torch down the enemy docks even.
Yeah, you really got to get that Dark Age presence established, especially if you're the teammate of the Delhi Sultan. And you see both Ottoman players doing that well, both YUIMetal and LaSh going with their respective military schools, so that spearman will be studying up for the next minute and a half, and hopefully he will be using all of that, what knowledge gave him in that military school, and hopefully we'll be able to protect these areas. Now, one of these things that we do got to think about with those spearmen as they go in, they might be trying to just protect their own prospective docks instead of going to the enemy dock. And the reason why is because those Delhi fishing boats, they have bows on them, Lidakor.
They for sure do, and that's the reason why you see both of these teams picking Delhi on this map. It gives you that safety to your initial dock, makes it much more difficult for the opponents to torch it down. Also protects the villager that's close to that pond, and that's always appreciated when you have a villager on shorefish. That's a little extra for both of these players. Now, it looks like the first spearman is actually patrolling the gold mine over here. Defensive strategy coming out from YUIMetal. I do not know what to think about that. Feels like he was afraid that LaSh was gonna push the gold mine of the opponent, and it looks like that will be the case, but this spearman is still just halfway through the map.
Yeah, and that's one of those things, those military schools actually taking the time to not only make the spearman, but the spearman is on foot. It's got to traverse a decent amount of the map. Now, he is around PuppyPaw's dock. Might want to try to get a little bit more aggressive. As you can see, he's even passing that dock, making his way south, and probably will end up somewhere around LoueMT. So YUIMetal having that spearman patrolling, doing the hokey pokey, turning himself around. It just means that when that enemy spearman is there, he'll be able to meet him. Now, both of these Ottoman players, just because they did not go water, as you see a little chunk coming out of that spearman, for the Ottoman players, they are going to be able to get to Feudal Age a little bit earlier, so twin minarets coming out for both of them.
Yeah, it looks like the scout will be rallied here as well, but this is deceiving here for LaSh and Puppy. You can pull the Scholar if you're Louis to heal up this spearman, and indeed that's going to be the case. This is why this one spearman is committed here. It just ensures that LaSh cannot harass this gold mine. And you see, this is going to be a difference. LaSh has his spearman damaged. On the other side, YUIMetal has a full HP spearman. So when we get closer to these battles in the middle, especially in low numbers, that will be a factor. In fact, I'm curious to see whether LaSh is going to pull that spearman back and have PuppyPaw heal it.
Yeah, and I think that would be a decent idea as well. Now, for PuppyPaw, as we're getting into the Feudal Ages for these Delhi players, obviously it's going to take them a little longer with these docks. PuppyPaw actually going with the Tower of Victory. You can see it on your screen. He's got 6 villagers building it up. I'm curious, Lidakor, what your opinion is on going with Tower of Victory, because I've seen some Delhi players going more in the Ghazi Raider department, especially because you have the food resources just because of the docks, so you're able to make a decent amount of Ghazi Raiders. If he's going Tower of Victory, you're probably thinking he's going in that Archer department, would you not?
Not necessarily. Oftentimes, especially in 1v1s, you see players opening Tower of Victory, playing into the Ghazi Raiders initially, because that kind of forces your opponent to mix in some spears, possibly. Or if they just go full archers, it's going to give you an edge initially. But as you said, when you see a Tower of Victory, most of the time you will see a transition to archers by mid-feudal at latest. Now, I don't want to sound my opinion on the Tower of Victory versus Dome of Faith question. I'm just gonna quote Lucifer. Actually, it was Vortex who said this, not Lucifron. He was asked what he thinks about the Dome of Faith. No, it was Lucifron, actually. I'm confusing the two Spanish bros, but one of these two has said this thing about the Dome of Faith. To me, this landmark does not exist.
Well, we are proving, no matter what Spanish brethren it is, we are proving them wrong, because the Dome of Faith is getting built, surprisingly, by LoueMT, and it's going to be about 80% of the way done. You can see LaSh on the other side, which Vodka pointed to just a little bit. LaSh adding a stable with that military school, so we're probably going to see some Sipahi out of LaSh as well, whereas YUIMetal for the Ottomans not going into the Sipahi, a couple archery ranges. And even though we talked about this being a mirror in terms of Civ pick, this is very much not a mirror in Civ decision making.
Indeed, this is a big debate, and we have had this discussion in the pregame. When you look at these two civilizations, you can see a combination of Ghazi Raiders and the Ottoman archers work, just as much as you can see Sipahi plus the Delhi archers work. And when you have the TOV for the Delhi player, you do anticipate archers, and that means that the Ottoman player will play into the Sipahi. Now, how does this work out in Feudal and Castle, you might ask? First, in Feudal, I probably prefer the Delhi archers plus Sipahi. Things will get interesting once you get to Castle Age, and once you can start mixing in those Janissaries for the Ottoman player that goes ranged. From that point on, it's gonna be difficult for the opposing Ottoman player to play into Lancers or even Sipahi.
Yeah, that really is that's the cataclysmic change in this matchup once those Janissaries, those gunpowder units actually start. Now, LoueMT trying to get a little cheeky with these walls up here, trying to protect his dock over there on the north side. But PuppyPaw does have a couple units in Feudal Age. Some of those Delhi archers that we talked about in that particular department going to be there. I'm curious to see what YUIMetal might do with some of his troops over there on the western side as well. PuppyPaw with that perpendicular wall that we like to see from some of those archers, just making sure that those docks are able to get harassed, and PuppyPaw doing a good job trying to harass them. He knows that the wood or the food economy coming out from these docks is so important, and that's going to dictate where these fights actually happen in Feudal Age.
Not just that, but the fact that LoueMT tried to hold very much on the front. You see, he tried to protect that dock, as you mentioned, but it was a very close wall to the enemy base. PuppyPaw diagnosed this quickly. He prevented that wall from going up by doing that perpendicular wall, and now he's getting his own walls up. Same thing on the other side, LaSh is walling as well. You see both of these teams respecting each other's ability to just flank around with the cavalry, surprising the eco, and both of them will adapt accordingly, getting some early walls up.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the mobility of these units and the rateability of these units. You can see, I mean, Vodka's camera can barely keep up with these Sipahi. That's how fast they're going. They are going back to LaSh's base, but they do have rateable potential, especially with a couple meters behind it, adding the sound of music to all of those Ottoman troops, which is just fantastic. Now, PuppyPaw being a real thorn in the side of LoueMT, because you talked about those walls getting cheeky. LoueMT does go with the Ghazi Raiders, like we talked about with the Dome of the Faith, so it will be able to help these archers. But one of the first real skirmishes that we're seeing in here, it looks like army composition from YUIMetal, a decent amount of more spearmen than LaSh. Is more of a Sipahi heavy army composition. This is not a fight LaSh wants to take.
Not at all. In fact, he needs his teammate right now, but this is where it gets interesting. Look at the composition. Actually, never mind, I was looking at the wrong side. We have a couple of picks over here from these Ghazi Raiders, but you see these archers moving out here. They are getting caught off guard, or are they? Here comes the flank from the Sipahi, and this is a 2v1 in the middle right now.
Yeah, this is the one thing from team games that you really want to avoid. PuppyPaw's archer mass, probably about 25 or 20 strong here. We'll be able to take down a lot of these spearmen. Looks like for YUIMetal, there's about 6 spearmen that you can see on the top left of your screen. Just because he's getting 2v1, YUIMetal's going to try to sacrifice a couple of these spearmen just to make sure his archer mass is safe, while Louis on the other side, he does have a couple gaudy razors. As for reinforcements on the north flank, did a really good job of trying to flank this archer mass. Sipahi are there, and I think there's just too many of them at this point. Some of these gaudy raiders are going to end up going down. Those metters over there on the north side actually going with ranged defense. You can see that little armor shield on top of that metter, so it means the archers for the Ottomans aren't going to be as good for YUIMetal, but now there's a decent amount of Sipahi for him. The archer mass from PuppyPaw did go down just a little bit, but we'll be able to add some reinforcements. LaSh doing a good job. We're talking about the choreography of these players. You really have to fight with each other. You can see that PuppyPaw and LaSh did that initially, and that's why they came ahead in this military exchange.
Yeah, this is a critical fight over here because Louis didn't have to commit all of his army. You see, he left a couple of Ghazi raiders raiding, and he did a good job harassing the enemies. It was so critical that YUIMetal could hold with the little army he had 2v1, especially when the support came in from a few Ghazi raiders. Once they arrived, it was difficult for LaSh and Puppy to push, and it also allowed Louis to just maintain some presence with these Ghazi raiders on the back line. Now, Puppy and LaSh have to commit some units to clean this up, and this results in some map control in the middle. You see, now you have both the sacred sites under the control of Yui's team.
Yeah, and I mean, we talked about a lot with the Delhi Sultanate about sacred sites and fishing economy and all that kind of stuff. Getting those sacred sites so important in feudal age because it provides that means to an end to get up to castle age. You take a look here. Actually, a decent amount of archers going down for PuppyPaw. That's about 5 or 6 archers. That arrow ship didn't do too bad before it became a shipwreck and an artifact, much like the Titanic that we've been hearing in the news so much over the past couple weeks.
Here come the Ghazi raiders. Couple of villager picks happen again. This is not really the deciding factor, though. It's the fight in the middle that's so problematic for LaSh and PuppyPaw. Both sacred sites, actually all 3 sacred sites for a moment were under the control of Yui's team. Now they secure them again. Sacred site timer begins as they do have a considerable army lead now as well. They seem to have gotten that momentum, and part of that comes from those raiding forces that have been distracting Puppy and LaSh.
Yeah, you got to give credit to LoueMT's micro right now. Just having those 4 or 5 Ghazi raiders on the north side, and you can even see them on the minimap. They're still moving. They're still trying to find resources. We talked about some of the 2v1 strategies for trying to catch an opposite army, an enemy army in harm's way, and I think they did a good job of that with PuppyPaw's archer mass. When there's no Sipahi around from LaSh, now we can see them actually coming in together. That mass, that archer mass, had to back up a little bit. That sacred site ended up being safe for just a little bit more time, but you got to think for the Delhi Sultanate, getting those sacred sites, obviously it's a good idea, but we're talking about more of a means to an end. You know, with these sacred sites going to be able to be captured by LoueMT and YUIMetal, it means we might see an earlier castle age out of those guys, and especially because LaSh got his gold mine successfully raided. Man, there are just Ghazi raiders all over the place. Lidakor, they're living up to their name.
As you said, it's when it comes to the sacred sites, it is the momentum that you get with that. It is the expedited castle age that you get with that. And let's not forget, now there is a 12 eco lead as well on the side of LoueMT and YUIMetal. They've been picking off villagers one at a time with those Ghazi raiders. They had 3 sacred sites for a while. They still do have 2. And this is going to just get LoueMT into castle age blazing fast. He's going to start popping out those lancers now. Obviously, with the Delhi, it will take some time to get the upgrades for the Ghazi raiders. But being able to start adding lancers and just continue to raid like that, it's going to get even more valuable. Plus, you do have the compound of the defender now. You get the cheap keeps, will allow you to start building up your villager count quickly. And more importantly, you could just drop a keep in the middle sacred sites and once again, just maintain control of them for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and that really is what it's all about for the Delhi Sultanate, getting that map control, because there's so much in the way of free resources, that passive income out here that we talk about so much in Age of Empires for PuppyPaw. Also going to be matching LoueMT in the Castle Age department, not necessarily in Landmark, chose the House of Learning instead, and we talked about the compound of the Defender. The House of Learning is going to take a while for those technologies to come in, but we'll see how much it actually pays off for him. Now it looks like some of these battles here, all 4 colors You can see on your screens at this time a lot of really good Sipahi mass from LaSh. We have a decent amount of archers and some spearmen from PuppyPaw as well. It looks like just because of that Castle Age coming in for both players, they might want to take this fight. Spearman trying to make up the front line. LoueMT has a decent amount of Lancers at this point. He has not been Castle Age for that long, but I'm seeing about 5 or 6 out there. He's got 11 total on the battlefield. The 12th one just hit the battlefield. So having those Castle Age units at a time when PuppyPaw, his Castle Age was a little bit more delayed, right? So he has no Lancers on the battlefield right now. He has 2 in queue. They realize that is not a fight that they want to take. They're going to back up. YUIMetal actually going with Castle Age before LaSh does with the MIA. And just like you alluded to, Lidakor might see some Jans coming out soon.
Yeah, that Night Mass is getting scary in the hands of LoueMT. Good news for PuppyPaw and LaSh is that they do have the walls up, so the opportunities to raid are somewhat limited here for LoueMT. But I don't think that they necessarily have to raid even. I think they're more than happy just maintaining this position in the middle, securing these sacred sites with keeps, and then once again playing into the sacred site gold, the relic gold income that's now going to be coming in for LoueMT. Obviously that's not your win condition if the game goes 40 minutes long, but at the stage it is currently, if you secure all 3 of those sacred sites with some keeps, it's going to be very difficult for Puppy and LaSh to make something happen quickly.
Yeah, and it's just incrementally getting that economic advantage, like you talked about with the sacred site. They have a little bit more map control, so not only with the sacred sites, but the relics also. You can hear some of them getting picked up by some of these players. Obviously, LoueMT would have first dibs on them, getting Castle Age first. Just like you said on the south side on that second sacred site, which is somewhere around the middle of the map, you see a keep that might be dropped in. These Ghazi Raiders and Lancers from LoueMT. Looks like they're going to try to take these Spearmen head on. Now, we talk about being a counter, but just because those are Castle Age Lancers against Feudal Age Spearmen and Lidakor, I can't even finish this sentence before they're already dead.
That's a very sad loss over there for PuppyPaw. It might not seem like it's much, but he just lost a unit that could have been a great auxiliary in a larger fight. And basically any damage that was done to those Lancers, it will be healed up by the monks. Don't forget, LoueMT aged up with the Dome of Faith, so he does have the ability to pop out Scholars quickly. And he is going to have quite a few Scholars out there to heal this damage army with. And you see the plan, it's clear now. Second keep coming up as well, they are going for the sacred sites. And it is going to be difficult for Puppy and LaSh to prevent the opponents from keeping control over those.
Yeah, and I mean, they will be keeping control, pun very much intended, and it's going to be an uphill battle for PuppyPaw and LaSh after they relinquished a little bit of that map control, and they really didn't have much in the way of options. Now you see a lot of pink villagers of the Ottoman variety from LaSh in this area, trying to get a lot of those outside guy food resources. A lot of dead villagers here. It looks like to be 4 or 5. PuppyPaw and LaSh are not happy about it. It looks like they're going to try to protect LaSh's villagers. Look at that Sipahi mass from LaSh over there on the western side that's going to make up this front line. Now, they will get up to that Castle Age variety eventually. It looks like they want to wait to kind of take this fight. They'll relinquish this little bit of the map, but for the Ottomans, it's so important to get some of these outside Gaia food resources because usually they're only on one town center. They use a lot of their wood for things like production buildings. Farm transitions are things that they want to delay as quickly as possible. So Louis and Yui having an area of control over this berry patch and over these deer, it's pretty huge for them.
It is. They see the massive Sipahi, they do not want to commit, and they are right to respect that. 45 Sipahi buffed by Lancers, or buff a matter, it's no joke. You see dancing back and forth over here once again. This is more about securing this middle ground though. I would not be shocked to see stone walls even behind this for LoueMT and YUIMetal. They have gotten control over the sacred sites. In fact, the timer now has hit 9 minutes already, and you do have keeps there as well. They are more than happy just pushing up the front line a little, making sure that if there's a fight happening, they do have a position to fall back to, and also their opponents won't be able to instantly assault these keeps.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about the sacred site counter, and this is something that I mentioned yesterday as well. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense, right? So that's why they're continuing to push the initiative. If they're taking battles near the base of PuppyPaw and LaSh, it just means they're not taking battles where the sacred sites are, and they don't have the ability to get neutralized. So if they're able to keep these areas secure while being offensive on the other side, it could be a big deal for them. And just like you kind of alluded to for stone walls, I actually want to make a point about that because I do think, I mean, stone walls are probably a good idea. LoueMT has the compounded defender. The one thing that's a little anti-synergistic with it is all of these soldiers happen to be on a horse. So they're going to need a little bit more foot soldiers if they want to make stone walls a little bit quickly. Now, LaSh and PuppyPaw trying to push the initiative. That's the palisade walls over there from LoueMT are not able to get completed, and we have a dead villager there as well. It looks like they're really targeting that secondary sacred site. They're noticing that timer click down to about 7 minutes, 30 seconds. Maybe they're smelling a little bit of pressure. They have to get up a little bit more forward, and it looks like they are doing that. PuppyPaw actually adding some siege in the background. We have a mangonel over there. Obviously, with the MIA for these Ottoman Empire players, we're going to see some siege and some anti-siege come out. Excellent by the spearmen over here by YUIMetal. Looks like both of these players, it's a typical 2v2. We have all four of them. There are multiple front lines going on. LaSh's Sipahi mass has to get split in multiple different areas, but he makes it to the ranged mass over there on the western side. There's going to be a lot of archers for the Ottoman Empire of YUIMetal that end up going down. A good mangonel shot by PuppyPaw. That mangonel getting its rocks off over there on that ranged mass. Lidakor, this looks really good for PuppyPaw and LaSh at a time when I thought they were on the back foot.
Numbers are looking good, but don't forget, Puppy's archers are heavily damaged there. They've eaten 2 big mangonel shots, but they've managed to break through. There is a constant flood of units coming in right now. And the composition, it feels a little lackluster right now for YUIMetal, actually. He is going into Sipahis now. When you look at LoueMT, that's what scares me. His army is non-existent. He's got 6 Lancers and 15 Scholars. Although they will get those Lancers in on the Mangonels, that's going to be a juicy pickup. If he can get them, quick reaction from LaSh and PuppyPaw will repel the Knights. Now it's a 3v1 army advantage, and as you said, PuppyPaw and LaSh got through those walls just before they were closed. They took a great fight, and now they are just battle to the metal. They do have momentum, starting to torch down these production buildings, and it's going to make it very difficult for either LoueMT or YUIMetal to just get that army on board. Counterattack now coming in the middle, but this will get cleaned up. Lovely to see from Puppy and LaSh how they just ignore the Sacred Site timer and go for the kill.
Oh yeah, I mean, the Sacred Site timer, they still have a few minutes on it, right? They got about 5.5 minutes. One of the things I think that's more important, not necessarily from neutralizing the Sacred Site, is exactly what PuppyPaw and LaSh are doing. Get in front of that Ottoman production. That's exactly what they did. They took down a couple military schools. They took down a blacksmith, so those military production buildings aren't going to be as productive as they usually are, but it's just going to make it so it's even more difficult for Yui to get a good Ottoman mass, just like getting that Ottoman snowball that we see more in a 1v1 setting. LaSh and PuppyPaw also trying to take it to him with a decent raid. Those Ottoman farm fields have to be vacated, and it looks like Yui at this point is trying to go for a farm transition. I don't think it's been much in the way of completed. There are some more farms on the north side. They find a wood line, and Lidakor, there's not that many Ottoman troops here. It looks like he was trying to mass up a little bit on the south side, trying to get a couple Janissaries, popped a mangonel like kindling at this point, so no siege superiority for YUIMetal. This is a lot of idle time. This is a problem.
That's a lot of mangonels though, and in a blink of an eye, all the archers disappear from the battlefield. Don't forget the Sacred Site timer is still going on. There is going to be a defensive keep. Army numbers getting close now. Mangonels cleaning up most of these crossbows and the archers. And if this army gets cleaned up, it will be difficult for Puppy and LaSh to contest those Sacred Sites.
Yeah, we just talked about the military surplus that PuppyPaw and LaSh is, as Vodka's pointing on the screen. Now we're in the 50s out of both players. LoueMT saved his teammate with this, getting all of those mangonels. He did lose just about all of them, if not every single one of them in the process, but getting rid of that archer mass is really, really important. I don't know, Lidakor, just because of how many units went down for PuppyPaw and LaSh, maybe this was a little bit of an overextension.
It's hard to say, right? They just wanted to go for the kill. They didn't have the tools to siege down those keeps with, so they thought it's easier to just wipe out one opponent and then decap one of the Sacred Sites. But now with the armies cleaned up, suddenly they are bumping into those keeps. The timer is getting close to completion, and they're also down by 50 eco, by the way.
Yeah, that was one of the points that I wanted to make afterward too, and it just shows how important the compound of the defender is. Right, LoueMT has a decent amount of keeps. You just saw another one on the northern side of where your YUIMetal's base is. They're all pumping out villagers. Economic count 180 to 115. PuppyPaw trying to establish just that little bit of map control around that sacred site. It looks like the keep is going to end up going up for him, but it's all about actually decapping these things. We're at about 4 minutes left. PuppyPaw just incrementally putting keeps a little bit forward. It begs the question, though, even though House of Learning is for PuppyPaw, a lot of those technologies have probably been in now that we're about 25 minutes into this game. Man, I would really love for those keeps to be pumping out villagers instead, though.
I have the feeling that they do. He's got 21 scholars out there. There's no way that Village Fortresses hasn't yet been completed. Poppy and LaSh are crawling closer, but there is 2 minutes left on the timer only. It's actually covered by the scoreboard, but it shows 2 minutes and 13 seconds right now. And that is getting awfully close here for Poppy and LaSh. Especially because, as you said, most of the decks for the Delhi player are now in. That includes boiling oil. So you cannot just commit under those keeps with your infantry and the cavalry. They will just get massacred, which is not something that's always the case for the Delhi. If you contest those keeps early before boiling oil, you can take them down pretty easily.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, for the Delhi Sultanate, it's going to take a little bit more time for the boiling oil, probably about 5 minutes, but just because of how long those keeps have been around, you know, they're probably going to end up going up, and you're probably hearing the ding-donging of some of those sacred sites. We got 1:30 left. That second sacred site, that middle sacred site, they're obviously targeting. There are a lot of siege equipment coming out for PuppyPaw and LaSh. We have a lot of mangonels. We have a decent amount of trebuchets as well. That keep is going to end up, if those trebuchets are okay, they're going to go down a little quickly. Lidakor, I want to point your direction. The LoueMT, the Delhi Sultanate, is going Imperial Age, and I don't know if I've ever seen this before.
Oh, this is such a crazy decision by him. If you think about it, it could work so well. They are basically not all in the sacred sites. If the sacred sites get decapped, he's going to have an imp advantage. But it also means that he just committed so many resources to going up to Imperial in a game where they're 1 minute away from sacred site victory. The keep is being shelled, and you really start to wonder, how would this game look like if he spent all those resources that he spent on imp on actually spending on army? Because it looks like the sacred site will be decapped over here. I don't think they can hold this keep any longer.
No, I don't think so either. A lot of villagers are trying to get repairs, but they're losing their lives in order to do so. They are going to back up. That keep ends up going down. We did see boiling oil did get triggered by that keep before it turned into just a solitary foundation. So a lot of those Ottoman troops probably at about 70% health, but will get the decap with only a minute to spare. And this is why, with LoueMT going Imperial Age, this is why he is playing in these series and we aren't. Because I'm seeing Imperial Age and I'm like, well, that's 3,600 resources you could have spent on army instead of trying to get the sacred site. They might have had the presence of mind to know that they weren't going to be able to keep that sacred site, and that all-in probably would have costed them the game. Now, when we're looking at the Imperial Age for LoueMT, and now just Castle Age for YUIMetal, economic count, LoueMT has the ability to continuously reproduce a lot of units where I don't think PuppyPaw and LaSh do. This might be the chance for LaSh and PuppyPaw to really make a good impact, and you can see they're trying to. Right on the north side of YUIMetal's base, there are a decent amount of Janissaries from LaSh as well, picking apart horsemen and spearmen alike. This is just a typical 1v1 here. PuppyPaw using keeps, trying to help him out. YUIMetal adding in some men-at-arms as well. Finally, Louis does get a little bit of a flank over there on the eastern side. Springhold's on the back from YUIMetal, make the siege superiority more in the category of the Chinese brethren. This army is getting cleared up by PuppyPaw and LaSh. Lidakor. Now we're looking at a military count 70 to 23.
We talked about the Ottoman comparison. One player going Cav, the other player going the Janissary Archer route. Now you see why, once you get to Castle Age, the Janissaries start prevailing. They're just such a good all-purpose unit, such a good counter to the cavalry as well when buffed by the matter. And now you have LoueMT in Imperial. This is looking really good for them now. There is still a strong forward position over here for LaSh and PuppyPaw, but the only way for them to get anything out of this game is if they somehow try to all-in this, push forward with the keeps, trap down production buildings, but even that seems quite unlikely. They're now facing overwhelming odds. It's 320 population against 150.
Yeah, I mean, that seems to be their only strategy at this point. I mean, there's 3 or 4 keeps up there from PuppyPaw. He's putting some trebs behind it, just trying to take down, but this isn't a 1v1 situation. You know, sniping landmarks with all of the trebuchets that you have is going to prove to be quite the issue and quite the time extension, as well. As you can see in this game, the very first game that we've casted, we have our very first Dumbo sighting. LoueMT with the Palace of the Sultan going to be able to get those hand cannon elephants, which, although Janissaries can pick them apart, don't slouch on those elephants. They can do some damage to a front line.
Yeah, especially when your opponent doesn't have a single Janissary. Here come the elephants. This is a fully boomed Delhi player now. Has pretty much all the text from Imperial as well. Elephants now moving out towards the keeps. And you see, they were just focused down all these villagers underneath. We could see a couple of bombards soon, but it looks like LoueMT will opt to go for the rams. They're starting to get rid of these keeps. Don't forget, folks, we see the big picture, the players do not. So Puppy and LaSh do not really know how much behind they are here.
No, they probably do not. But now we have an elephant horde. What's really nice about them, while they're trailing back, they are going to take a little bonus damage just because they are ranged units. They are going to take a little bonus damage against those Sipahi, but I don't think not a single elephant went down while 2 keeps went down for PuppyPaw and LaSh. Those are some tanky boys, and PuppyPaw trying to get some elephants of him by himself over there. He got a war elephant of the Castle Age variety. Not going to be doing too much to a lot of those Delhi elephants, and even though they're slow, they can just stomp around and find map control wherever, especially when they have the power of 8 or 9 scholars behind them healing them up.
That's
Big
exactly
fight coming up here with the Sipahi and the Spearmen. It looks like one elephant will end up going down, but just because they're able to trail backwards, they're going to be able to kite a lot of these units. Military count from both of these guys, 120 to 40. 3 times as much military. Now it's getting to the point where it's almost 4 times as much military. Scholars using everything they've learned in those mosques, trying to heal up those elephants. It looks like maybe one of them ended up going down. The only thing for military that I can see here, besides 1 or 2 elephants, is just some siege that is ripe for the taking for a lot of these elephants. Lidakor, this was not a good engagement for PuppyPaw and LaSh at all.
It wasn't, and they do tap out of game number 1. YUIMetal and LoueMT take driver here in game number 1. And what a spectacular game we've been treated with here in game number 1. We get very close to the Sacred Site finish, and it was a curious choice to see LoueMT go into Imperial. I think he could have all-in it. He could have gone to Imperial. Both of those options were available, and he decided not to commit everything to the Sacred Site victory. Just take the game to a later stage and then finish it off there. It was a mirror, and it was a win by the Chinese team over here. They are the first one on the board.
Yeah, I think one real takeaway from LoueMT, we didn't look at his base too much, but he got a lot of Imperial Age technologies as the Delhi Sultanate really quickly, because you saw even elite Lancers coming out maybe just about like a minute and a half, 2 minutes after the Palace of the Sultan actually got completed. So we joke about Delhi Imperial Age being like, oh yeah, it's Imperial Age. What does it matter? I'll see you in 15 minutes when your technologies actually get completed. But he must have had a lot of scholars reading a lot of books.
He did. And part of the reason why is because he did have the House of Learning, or the Dome of Fate actually, was his landmark of choice when he went to Feudal Age. And I would be shocked if he wasn't constantly producing scholars throughout the entire game. He didn't just go up to Castle Age and say, okay, I stop. He kept pumping those out. This allowed him to get some Castle Age technologies in quickly, allowed him to boom up with the village fortresses, then gets to Imperial, and when he's done researching all these techs, he can just turn those into battlefield healers, keeping that elephant army alive.
Yeah, that's such a good transition, right? And we saw that with the elephants, right? They're like 9 or 10, and especially with the swiftness of those scholars, they run so fast. You know, you swear with all of the books that they read, there's something about track and field in there, just because of how much they run. But enough talk about game number one. We're going to be going into game number two. And Lidakor, it is not only game number two, it's mirror number two.
Okay, so very similar civilization picks for the first two games. This also means that as we get closer to game number 5, possibly, we will see more and more mirrors as both teams are starting to run low on the same civilizations. But game number 1, we have seen a mirror, but the approach that was taken by both of these teams, or either of these teams, were vastly different. Do you see the same thing over here between these two teams? Same civilizations, but very different strategies?
I think there's a possibility of that happening, especially with these actual civs that are participating in this mirror. And the one that I really want to point the attention to is the Abbasid dynasty, the Rus. I think everybody, as far as the pro scene, would probably, if they had to pick the number one civ, I think they'd pick the Rus at this point. So the way they play is pretty standard. I mean, you're going with Kremlin and Feudal Age. You're trying to get an extra town center, maybe 2 extra town centers. It kind of depends. For the Abbasid dynasty, and it's something that I alluded to yesterday while casting a Abbasid game on Lippity, it's not just drag your face across the keyboard and pick economic wing anymore. You know, now it's some of those changes to the House of Wisdom and a lot of those wings with fresh foodstuffs being in the starting town center, meaning you don't have to be pigeonholed or tunnel visioned into picking economic wing. We see some military wing coming out in Feudal Age, and some we still see economic wing just because you want to get your crescents as fertile as possible before you start making some of those town centers. It feels like to me in this matchup, while looking at it and from the games that I saw yesterday, that economic wing still has a lot of merit. Because remember, your teammate's Rus, and your teammate has the Kremlin. They can call those little gremlins whenever they want to try to help you out on a defensive strategy. When you go military wing and feudal, you have 2 spearmen, you have 2 archers. Are you really going to overwhelm your opponent? Are you really going to do a lot of damage that way? Maybe not so much, but I'm starting to think this could be the point where PuppyPaw and LaSh try to tie things up, because I don't know about you, you've probably casted more PuppyPaw games than I have, but his Abbasid dynasty is to die for. It's just chef's kiss.
I have to agree with you. PuppyPaw is so well known for playing Abbasids. Ever since the game was released, he was an Abbasid enjoyer, and in a team game setting, this is an immensely valuable civilization. The ability to debuff the enemy knights with your initial camel archers, the way to play into mass archers and just play into composite bows once you get to Castle Age, the ability to have good trade, especially on a well-defendable map like Lippany, the ability to play into camel riders if need be. All these things make Abbasid an extremely valuable team game civilization. And in the hands of an expert Abbasid player like PuppyPaw, they are definitely a threat.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The camel unease is something that should be belabored even more that you talk about, because, again, we have 2 Rus here that are cavalry civilizations. And I mean, if you're a cavalry, if you're a knight, or even if you're a horse, I kind of get it. You have this weird animal, it's got a couple humps on its back, it's spitting all over the damn place. I'd be a little spooked as well, also, with 20% of a damage reduction. And it just means with all of those knights being a front line, they're not as bad, or they're not as big of the DPS unit that we usually see. And I think this is something that I'm going to harp on, because this is not the last time we're going to see Rus today. It just means there's one thing that the Rus do that's so very important in a lot of battles, Lidakor, and it's Saint's Blessing. I need to see it.
Oh, could be a thing. It's something that's comparable to the Matter buff to a certain extent, obviously not as impactful, but we have seen that, especially in mirror matchups, small differences make the mile. If either of these teams uses Saint's Blessing, it could be something that swings a single battle and that can turn into massive momentum that wins a game. Now, the thing I'm curious about is the amount of town centers that we're going to see in this game. We have the Rus, they love to play into 2 TCs, not necessarily in a team game setting, but definitely in 1v1s. Abbasid love their eco. We could see a lot of town centers over here, or we could possibly see early trade as well. Do you think either of those will be realistic here?
Trade wing, I mean, if you're thinking about, I'm guessing when you're alluding to for early trade, you're talking about Abbasid going trade wing. And tough. it's tough in the feudal age. The Rus can have a decent presence on the map, so your opponent could try to harass it. They do well in terms of mobility, obviously, just having cavalry. So it might depend on the spawn of where those neutral trading posts happen to be on this map. And I think it would take a lot of adaptation for one of these teams to do if they were going to do trade wing, because it's not necessarily going to be on the forefront of their mind when they're starting this game, right? Mostly for the Abbasid dynasty, especially in these 2v2s that we've seen thus far, have been talking about going multiple town centers, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. And I actually, for the Roost, there are no slouch to town centers, as you alluded to previously as well. I've seen Beastie actually do 3 town centers in this matchup. And he did a really good job in the economic sense, to the point where you had a post-Imperial economy that was so vast. He had 50 knights in his queue, and he was just able to continuously pump out some knights. So maybe for the Rus, we might see town centers. What I will say, and I think I'm doing a lot of predicting today, I will say for a little bit of prediction, I'm going to say 6 town centers.
You mean between the 2 teams combined?
No. Each one will have 6.
6? That feels way too aggressive for my taste. I have the feeling that if you play into a lot of TCs and play very defensive, that opens up the opportunity for the opponent to play into trade. And that's something that returns the investment a lot faster than extra town centers do. And that's part of the reason why I could see both of these teams playing on low TCs, actually, knowing that if they don't play for the map control, knowing that if they play very defensive and into TCs, they could actually get out-muscled in terms of eco if the opponent starts trading early.
Yeah, and I mean, trade is kind of the counter to multiple town centers, exactly like you said, because of the payoff is as quickly. So we'll see if they get to trading. Our overlay has been initiated. We are in game number 2 of the semifinals in Afreeca TV duos, spawning in on the south side, playing again as the cool colors. LoueMT playing as the color blue. In the Rus, his teammate YUIMetal playing as the Abbasid dynasty. Lidakor, who are they playing against?
It is going to be a mirror matchup here. It's Puppy and LaSh, and we're against YUIMetal and LoueMT. They did play a mirror matchup in the previous game as well, but we have seen, despite playing a mirror matchup, the 2 teams taking very different pathways and very different approaches on using those specific civilizations. And it's going to be interesting to see whether we have that same kind of scenario here, where both of these teams are using the same civs, but the strategy that they undertake, or the strategies that they opt to go for, will be vastly different. Now, this Lipany generation appears to be very open. We don't have a lot of those cliffs that would make it very easy for either of these teams to wall, but we do have some strategically placed forests, which could become a factor soon. So this is definitely one of the more open Lipany generations, and that should promote a little bit more aggression here.
Yeah, I think you always want, if you're a player, you probably want a Lipany to look more like Dry Arabia than Mountain Pass, right? This was definitely more of a Dry Arabia kind of stuff. And look at this little mountain that Vodka's showing on your screen. It has some aesthetically pleasing forest over there on the western side. That's one of those where if you put a nice keep landmark there, like a Spasskaya Tower, let's say, for the Rus, it would be just a beautiful sight to behold, wouldn't it?
It would. You would get some style points for it. It's a real shame that you don't win series by getting style points, but by getting actual points through victories in these games. Obviously, bounty is going to be a big factor over here. Vodka is going to show that to us in a matter of moments. One of the players is sitting at 350. I guess one of the guesses that we have to make, which of these Rus players is sitting at 350? Okay, it's gonna be LoueMT. Vodka is spoiling us here. Other side, what do we have? Ooh.
Vodka.
Yeah, he was looking for the Rus player.
There we go. Okay, 225. So both of these guys will be able to get their wheelbarrows in Dark Age, which is super important for the Rus player. Vodka did highlight on the northern part of Louis and Yui's bases, there was quite the deer infestation up there. 3 deer packs pretty much right next to each other, along with the stone mine, could be a pretty crispy secondary TC mark. So we'll see if one of the civilizations, either Louis or Yui, wants to make that. You talked about in the mirror having some derivations from one another, and we're already seeing that. Both Kremlin's going to be for the Roost player, but PuppyPaw choosing to go with the economic wing, Yui with the military wing. I've seen the economic wing do better in games yesterday, although I only have anecdotal evidence. What's your take on the wing choices from these guys?
I think a lot comes down to how you use this military wing at the beginning here. When you look at YUIMetal, he's going to get 2 spears, he's going to get 2 archers. What you can accomplish with those first few units will determine how effective this wing is going to be for you in Feudal. I feel like there could be some damage potential, especially on the Abbasid player. You could be the one dictating where the opponent can place his second DC by having that presence with those units. But if you fail to find any value, I like the economy wing a lot more. So I think both of these options are viable, but when you look at YUIMetal, it is going to be in his hands how efficient the military wing will be.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it all boils down to that first couple minutes, right? Those spearmen and archers now coming out of the House of Wisdom at about the 420 blaze it mark, and they will be starting to matriculate. You can see that little teal blob going forward, kind of northeast on the mini-map. Looks like you are correct. He is going to start to target that Abbasid player. Thing of it is, take a look at that Abbasid spawn over there on the northeast part of the map. He's got a stone mine that I don't think, military wing or otherwise, I don't think you're getting there.
Yeah, that's a lovely spawn, and one of the features that you see of EGC Lippany here is the fact that the 2 teammates spawn very closely to each other. It makes it a lot more viable to play into these boomy or eco-focused approaches, as we do see stone being mined over here by, I think, the teal player, that's YUIMetal. We've seen stone being mined by PuppyPaw, the other Abbasid player, and I think Louis also dropped a mining camp on a stone. So we will see both players of Yui's team going into additional TCs. I do not know if LaSh is actually going for a second TC. He might be the only one playing on one.
Yeah, I think if LaSh does, it would be a little bit more delayed if he actually made the choice to. He already has a stable, and he already has knights in production. That first early knight from the Roost player hitting the battlefield and actually going with a second stable. So this appears to me a 1 TC play from him. We talked about YUIMetal having the damage coming out from these 2 spearmen, these 2 archers that you can see, and how much turmoil you can cause for the Abbasid player. LaSh has put himself in that position as well. With those knights that are going to be hitting the battlefield, he's going to be trying to attack, I would imagine, the Abbasid player from the other side, just because of how unrateable Roost bases usually are. So we'll see if those couple knights can actually do some damage. LoueMT, as you could see, however, that Vodka pointed out, he's going pro scouts. He's got 6 scouts. He's already making a 7th. I really, in a 2v2 situation, Lidakor, I love going pro scouts. There's so much deer out here that you could take.
It's immensely valuable, especially when you can take away that food from the opponent's side. You see now LaSh is going for some stone himself, so he will play into 2 TCs, but I'm starting to get worried for PuppyPaw and LaSh over here. You look at their bases, it looks like first of all PuppyPaw will go for a 3rd TC, but as you mentioned, it is going to be pro scouts for LoueMT. They will have a lot of food to work with. There will be a second town center for LoueMT much faster than LaSh will get his. And if you combine all these things, you feel like the potential to escalate economy for LoueMT and YUIMetal are much better than it is for LaSh and Puppy.
Yeah, the way that these town centers are starting to develop, I have half a mind to agree with you. One of the things that PuppyPaw does so well with the Abbasid dynasty, and he's putting his 3rd town center, it looks like one's going to be a little south, a little bit could be in harm's way with that deer patch that's over there. LoueMT trying to yoink a deer, but that scout is going to end up losing its life trying to do so. With PuppyPaw in the Abbasid dynasty, one of the things I talked about with his Abbasid dynasty play from yesterday is he does such a good job at being just greedy enough. That third town center coming in on the south side is going to protect that gold. He's going to have a deer patch around there as well. And if you notice, he not only knows what civ he's playing, he knows what civs he's playing against. And he has not been deterred from getting this third town center. It's before the 8-minute mark, and that thing's going to go up.
Yeah, there's the additional town center coming out here for LaSh. It is going to secure a lot of precious resources here, but it's also very far away from that starting base. It might be very challenging to defend this, especially as the game starts to go into a deeper stage.
Yeah, and that's one of the risks of putting a town center out that far. And you understand why. He's trying to do his best attempt at pulling that pork over. You know, the Roost players on this map are the only ones that are actually able to get the boar for the Abbasid Dynasty. It is haram, so you're not able to eat it. This boar is going to get pulled pretty close to that town center. I think he just, it's a really, really good placement for that town center, right? So you're giving up that little bit of defensibility. You're giving up a little bit of that risk. But there are 2 boar next to that town center. And for a Roost player, not only is that 150 bounty, but that's 4,000 food. Lidakor, I'd be licking my chops right now.
That's very valuable. You see, there is an interesting hunting cabin placed over here. Not sure what to think. Oh, there's a boar right next to it. I completely missed that. Okay, that's a good hunting cabin. Then it also has a couple of trees surrounding it. Yeah, could have been on the other side, as Vodka is pointing out, but maybe he wasn't able to fit it there. Whichever the case, this is a juicy spot for him to be in. And as you said, 2 boars is no joke. That is something that pretty much compensates for the lost deer on the other side. Looks like we will have trenches dug by LoueMT and YUIMetal. They are walling themselves up. Ecos are looking pretty close, but there's a Castle Age coming in here for PuppyPaw quickly, and it is with the military wing. This is the window. I know, I'm a big preacher of the Camel Riders. This is a window where they could definitely think about that. They are facing a couple of knights, only a handful of spears and camel or standard archers. If you go heavy into the Camel Riders over here, you could possibly punish a lot.
Oh, exactly. Especially because you know you're playing against a Rus opponent who wants to make cavalry units, right? So doing things like Camel Riders would be a good idea, and getting a couple for free out of the gate is obviously a good idea as well. And I think for the military wing that we saw initially from YUIMetal, I have a half a mind to think what PuppyPaw did in terms of his wing choice was just that much better. Instead of getting 2 free spearmen and archers that really didn't do too much, he's going to get a couple Camel Riders that he could use for raiding potential. And he was the first to go up to Castle Age because of how easy it was to get those town centers up initially. We talk about for the Abbasid Dynasty going up to Castle Age, it's 1 minute and 45 seconds, whether you like it or not. So it takes a little bit of time for you to get there. Yui going with the culture wing in Castle Age, and LoueMT actually going with the Abbey of the Trinity. Might not have much in terms of high trade house placement, but there's a couple forests right next to each other. Maybe he didn't like some of the placements. Maybe he thinks the Abbey is better. We've seen more high trade house than Abbey of the Trinity, so I'm a little bit surprised at this pick.
I think it has to go down to the fact that he doesn't want to give the relics to the opponent. Especially because he is going to beat LaSh to Castle Age. So at this point, he's going to say, okay, I'm up against Roost, this is a mirror matchup. I just want to make sure that my opponent does not get the majority of the relics. Obviously, you're missing out on the gold trickle from the Hydrate House, but you do have those relics to compensate for it. And more importantly, you have taken away relics from the opponent, which is immensely valuable still.
Oh, yeah, the best way to take relics away from your opponent is to just take them for yourself, right? That little extra gold trickle, obviously, for the Roost is going to help them out. It's really synergistic with the hunting cabins that give you that little bit of gold trickle as well. And you got to remember for the Abbey of the Trinity, for those that you've probably seen High Trade House more and might forget what the Abbey does, a lot of those warrior monks, they're all half price. And they're quite the expensive unit. Usually they're 40 food, 200 gold. So getting them at half price is really important. And Lidakor, I'm going to talk about Saint's Blessing again, and you're going to get sick of me at this point, but they have some extra Saint's Blessings technologies where if they decide to use them can be pivotal.
They could be. It's also the fact that this building acts as a monastery. So not only do you get your warrior monks for a lower cost, it's also the fact that you... Oh, Knights getting a good surround over here while we're talking about that. But You also don't have to build an extra monastery to start popping out those warrior monks if you go with the Abbey. And you see LoueMT is going heavy on those warrior monks. He already has 2 of them out. He won't be struggling with population because he's just replacing those knights right now with the warrior monks.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And having a couple in just for healing potential is good too. After you get the relics, the warrior monks have use after those relics get scooped out. But it looks like PuppyPaw trying to extend a little bit over there on the eastern side of the map, trying to extend a little bit south, trying to get a little map control. Maybe LoueMT will have a little bit more of a fight to try to get those relics. LaSh on the other side, and I think this is a good choice going with the high trade house because he is second out of the Roost players and fourth in terms of the total of actually going up to Castle Age. So getting that instant gold trickle with the high trade house is really going to help you out instead of fighting for relics where in a time of map control you've probably already lost it on your side.
Yeah, that's a fair point. There is still going to be some relics possibly to be picked up, but you cannot assume that they will be there by the time you get up to Castle Age. So the best thing that you can do is just go up to Castle Age with the high trade house, and if you can find some relics, great. It looks like, in fact, PuppyPaw will find a couple of relics over here for his team. Trenches have pretty much been secured. Both teams have walled themselves up. So now the interesting thing is going to be the imp timings. And don't forget, YUIMetal went to Castle Age with the Culture Wing, so he is going to have the discount on going into Imperial.
Yeah, he will. And the Imperial Age obviously is one of the most important technologies. This relic by the Warrior Monk of LoueMT almost got yoinked, but those Knights by LaSh have something to say about it. One of the things that we talk about with relics and in terms of actually getting there, we talk about more in the HRE perspective, but it's about where those relics and that Warrior Monk actually drops it near that sacred site. But a little bit of it can be field position. You know, you get the relic closer to your own monastery, closer to your own mosque, and it could mean that you're able to pick it up a little bit later. Now, it looks like PuppyPaw and LaSh, more so in the PuppyPaw department over here on the eastern side, definitely going more military than trying to get imp. You can see the military count for him rising. He has a lot of units in the queue, crossbowmen, spearmen, archers. Just because PuppyPaw is military wing, got to remember some of those military technologies for the House of Wisdom, one of them being composite bows. Those archers fire so quickly. He's got some spearmen around to kind of protect the siege. He doesn't need things like advanced siege engineering to build them. He can just build them on the battlefield, but he's going to be running into a 2v1 if he tries to take this fight. He does have a lot of military, and the military count is favored for PuppyPaw and LaSh, but you got to wait for some of those reinforcements, and LaSh going to have some knights in the front ground here. And now that they're bringing their forces together, this could be an issue. Oh my god, there's a entire Abbasid province of peasants that are getting shelled by rocks, archer arrows, crossbow bolts, and I'm sure if we had the sound turned up just a little bit more, you can hear all of the shrieks of those Abbasid villagers that burn in your brain.
Oh my lord, that was a massive massacre. And you see, now PuppyPaw and LaSh not only have the army lead, but they also have the villager lead. This is getting dicey for YUIMetal and LoueMT. Their army is outnumbered very heavily over here, and the composition also looks a lot better for Puppy and LaSh.
Yeah, and I think it's just the sheer mass of it as well. They do have a little bit of siege superiority, just having the mangonels that are there. Spearmen are going to be trying to make a front line along with the Knights of LoueMT. A lot of that range mass from PuppyPaw is going to continue to remain untouched. Louis smells a little bit of issue trying to call a lot of Kremlin militia. You can see them trying to make that front over there on the south side of the front line. The range mass from PuppyPaw is just continuing to rain hell in this area. There's a lot of blue knight corpses from LoueMT. He does not have any knights left in this fight. Springolds are going to be going down. Siege superiority is now with PuppyPaw and LaSh. Lidakor, I think this is the push that they really need. The mangonels are going to make quick work out of those ranged mass. A lot of them going down to about 20% health. Maybe another archer arrow or two is going to end up taking them down. YUIMetal on the western side, trying to get a keep, which is more of a desperation keep than anything else. The range mass from PuppyPaw that has continued to be untouched, along with those mangonels just getting their rocks off over there on those villagers. A lot of them are going to end up going down. This is a huge sacrifice for YUIMetal, and even if that keep ends up going up, which looks like it might not, you wasted a lot of villagers in order to do that. I think that keeps at about 94%. It's not there. YUIMetal is bringing about 30 villagers over here on the western side, and they are not protected buy anything. The keep's gonna go up, Lidakor, but at what cost?
It's pretty much the cost of the game. It was lovely to see how PuppyPaw held the Mangonels back until the Knights traded, and he could get his own Knights on the opponent's Springolds. He held those Mangonels back for so long. In fact, so much so that I was wondering if those could have been what decided the battle. In the end, what he had on the field, the infantry, the cavalry, was enough, and keeping those Mangonels back meant that he had something to deny that castle with. The castle goes up. Villager count isn't even looking that terrible given the circumstances for LoueMetal or LoueMT and YUIMetal. But their army is now just shattered. It's a 4-to-1 army advantage. PuppyPaw and LaSh know this fully well, and they are here to punish.
Oh yeah, and for Louis and Yui, they got to get their army mass up, and they have to in a hurry. Military count 100 to 25, the entire range mass from PuppyPaw just waltzing in to the streets of this Muscovite area where LoueMT has. Desperation Keep was made over there on the east side by LoueMT, and there's a decent range mass and basically only range from PuppyPaw, so it'll take a while, and it actually will force them to back up. LaSh with his Knights trying to get a little cheeky, maybe getting a couple Vil picks, and got 1 or 2, but there were more Kremlin militia just stockpiled in that Kremlin. And this is one of the things of the reason why that big fight in the beginning and how important it was that PuppyPaw and LaSh ended up winning it is because Louis and Yui have to spend all of their resources trying to get military so they can stay alive. PuppyPaw's military stayed alive during that battle. He didn't need to spend those resources to have the military that he has now. He's going up with the culture wing.
Yeah, that's the escalation potential he has over here. Very similar to what we have seen in the previous game. You are in a commanding position, you do have comparable army to the opponent, if not better, and you can use that window to age up and secure long-term advantage. That's exactly what we are seeing over here from PuppyPaw. And while the army numbers are getting closer and closer, once this army gets up to Imperial, it's going to get even more so powerful. You will have hand cannoneers from the Abbasids added in there. Oh, you gotta be careful with the Mangonels though. That is still a wild card. If you lose the Mangonels, and you do have some good siege over here from YUIMetal and LoueMT, you could easily get punished.
Yeah, and it looks like they just might, not necessarily by the Kremlin militia, because their clock struck midnight and all of them hit the ground just about at the same time. One Mangonel did get popped by some Springolds from YUIMetal, so it looks like one Mangonel is left. If that Mangonel stays there, it will end up getting hit. So you are correct. Siege superiority, it looks like, is in the advantage of Louis and Yui. With that Mangonel getting popped like a water balloon, we can kind of determine that Yui and Louis do have that siege superiority. So it's going to make PuppyPaw and LaSh back up. Only about 15 seconds until Culture Wing ends up coming. So if they want to wait to take a fight, wait for those Imperial upgrades to come in, that would be okay. To be honest, I think they're in a position where they can't throw the game, and if you get some of those lucky Mangonel shots that we just saw on some crossbowmen and some archers, that could tell the tape and give Louis and Yui the idea to come back. Knights over there on the eastern side, they are blessed by the Saint Lidakor. There's a decent amount of warrior monks over here getting some attacks. They are a little bit tankier, and a couple crossbowmen, some archers ended up going down. I know I'm saying my bias about Saint's blessing on that one, but it looks like PuppyPaw is going to have to back up. He'll be in a 2v1 situation because LaSh split up his Knights over there on the western side to try to raid some economic units from YUIMetal just to make sure he can't get the military mass that he needs in Castle Age. But this ranged mass Lidakor, there's nowhere for them to go for PuppyPaw. This is definitely an overextension. They're all going to go down.
I feel like PuppyPaw might be okay with this. These are Imperial Age units trading against Castle Age forces, and it means that they are buying time for that boom to come into play. But it could be a risky decision, as you mentioned. He's about to lose most of these archers. There is a keep now up on the front line. We will have to take a look at available gold for PuppyPaw's team, because that might have been a critical gold. But I think PuppyPaw is still alright with this. Army numbers are even, but they've managed to do a lot of eco damage. They have all 3 sacred sites, and both of their players are fully boomed. Having said that, as you mentioned, that was a lot of archers going down, and when you look at LoueMT and YUIMetal, they are players that do not quit easily. You give them a window to recover, and they will use it.
Yeah, and recover is what they're really trying to do. That military count is up just a little bit more at about 70 to 90. So PuppyPaw and LaSh still being favored. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight that PuppyPaw and LaSh did a really good job in, while they were in the bases of LoueMT and YUIMetal, it just meant that they were able to shore up the rest of the map. Those walls that the impressive Night Mass from LaSh are getting taken down, those are basically the borders, like you said in the beginning of the game, where the trenches are dug. They can't go out any further than those trenches, whereas PuppyPaw and LaSh, they have basically 75% of this map at their disposal. PuppyPaw actually transitioning into more horsemen than anything else, trying to get some economic raids. YUIMetal did have some villagers over here on the eastern side and did end up getting taken down. Now PuppyPaw, with the amount of economy that he has, can afford to make some of these really expensive siege technologies. And we see a bombard or siege units, I should say. LaSh going to be able to get a surround on this ranged mass. These are all archers, Lidakor. They're not going to do anything to these knights.
Oh, it's a massacre now. I've been looking at the Night Mass for a long time, and this comes at the worst possible time for the YUIMetal and LoueMT. Louis was just on his way to Imperial with this Paskaya Tower, only to realize that there is going to be nothing left for his team to defend their bases with. All the archers are now gone, and the Night Mass is just so much bigger here for LaSh. Indeed, LoueMT and YUIMetal will tap out, and it is an even-Steven series. Second mirror of the series, but this time around, LaSh and PuppyPaw secure the game and make this an even series.
Oh, man, I'll tell you what. LaSh did a very good job surrounding not only just that archer mass, but dictating presence of how the game was going to end up going. Look at the villager count from PuppyPaw. Had about 130-ish, maybe 135 villagers at the end. I'm going to say this time and time again because we talked about how PuppyPaw's Abbasid Dynasty is. If you want to learn how to play Abbasid Dynasty, just watch this man. He's good at what he does, and he has the amount of greedy potential to turn into that military force. Look at how much military he had in that middle of the castle going into that early Imperial kind of area. He was sitting on 70 military, even though he went 3 town centers right out of the gate. It's so impressive to watch.
And frankly, when you look at the villager graph, it started by losing 15 villagers from YUIMetal, when all the Abbasid villagers just went out on the gate, got all massacred. But it's more about the story of military escalation. Puppy and LaSh were faster building up their military in Middle Castle Age, and by the time YUIMetal and LoueMT started building up an army, they faced almost a 2-to-1 army ratio. There was a critical fight, casualties were high for both sides, but it was Puppy and LaSh who could do a lot of eco damage off the back of that. And once that happened, it was just a snowball out of control. Brings us to Hill and Dale, which is going to be the first home map of LoueMT and YUIMetal. We've yet to get the civilization picks from the admins, but you gotta wonder if you are thinking about HRE, possibly Chinese, maybe English. A lot of options remaining over here, but you do have to keep in mind, if we go to game number 5, all the civilizations will have to be used for both teams. So you need to start thinking about distributing the remaining civilizations between the remaining maps.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And for these series that do have the tendency to go their initial best of, and then we could be looking at another 5-game series on this one. You're exactly right. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You know, you can't play the role of the hare in this one, especially with those first 2 maps. You had a lot of good civs that you picked. Honestly, when you're playing with some of those really powerful civilizations like the Rus, getting a loss hurts. It really does. And I think we can feel the momentum kind of shifting a little bit for a PuppyPaw and LaSh. Now, I have seen a lot of Chinese on Hill and Dale, and we are going to see it yet again. This is our first non-mirror of today. However, Louis and Yui going with the Mongolians, whereas PuppyPaw and LaSh are going to be going the role of HRE.
This is either going to be a very quick game or a very long game that's easy to win for Puppy and LaSh, I feel. You look at these 2 pairings. Mongols are known for their early aggression. Now they can play into the Kashik as well. But on this map specifically, you think more in the lines of early aggression. And if that doesn't work out, the HRE have crazy escalation potential. They can go fast Imperial, they do have the pass of Swabia. In a blink of an eye, Puppy and LaSh could build a massive eco lead. And once you get that, it's extremely difficult to stop this combination of civilizations on this map. So you really feel like it is in the hands of LoueMT and YUIMetal to do something with that Mongols pick. If it doesn't work out well in early game, it is going to be a challenging one to work with. Having said that, if you just boom on the TCs with the Chinese and the HRE, the Mongols could trade.
Yep, and that is the catalyst of what we're going to be talking about for probably the first 10 minutes of this game. We've seen Chinese and Mongols play on this map, and one of the things that the Mongolians will like to do, not necessarily doing things like getting aggressive in Dark Age just because of the map design, right? It's a little bit difficult to do that. A lot of the times the Chinese will put the Barbican in an area where they would expect any kind of aggression to go, so it becomes a little challenging for them to do that. But the Mongolians, they'll go Silver Tree in Feudal Age and start to get that trade route. And I believe, if I remember correctly, Louis and Yui actually did this with the Chinese and Mongols. I think chat will correct me if I'm incorrect. They probably know the games better than I do, even though I casted them. But when they are able to do that, especially against Chinese and HRE, where both of those civilizations normally like to play passively, the Mongolians could get their trade route off without a hitch. And some of the greedier trade routes that we've seen, because the Holy Roman Empire, I mean, I'm talking more so in a 1v1 setting, but I think this can correlate to 2v2. They play solitaire. They want to be left alone. They want to do their own HRE things, and they'll come out when they're ready. They're like a scared deer. If you put them in the headlights, they're going to end up running away. So you got to let them, if you're going to be the HRE player. And most likely from watching the PuppyPaw and LaSh practice games that I've seen throughout the week, HRE usually goes by the way of LaSh, and PuppyPaw's China is usually very good as well. But for LaSh, for the HRE, you're right. It's all about getting up to those ages, just getting quicker and quicker throughout the ages. We've seen some super impressive Palace of Swabia timings to the point where the Mongolians could be trying to get their trade route with their Silver Tree in Feudal a decent amount, and we could already see LaSh and Imperial at that point.
Now, looking at this matchup, we talked about game number 2. You have a multi-TC build. Trade oftentimes is capable of beating that. But that rule doesn't necessarily apply to the HRE. You do have, of course, the Arcane Chapel buff. You can get to Imperial very fast, get the Pass of Schwabia rolling. So if there is any pairing against which a trade build could struggle against, I feel like that's a combination of the HRE with the Chinese. The other thing that comes into my mind is that HRE is known for booming, but it's not something that is to be taken for granted. Technically, they can play into the Burgrave Palace, play very aggressive, play men-at-arms, and if both of the opponents are just booming, Mongols trading, Chinese just playing into, let's say, walls, 2TC Song Dynasty, they could easily get punished by that. Now, normally, a Burgrave Palace is difficult to sustain when it comes to the production because you don't have the food eco, but you do have a teammate over here, so this kind of opens up an option for Puppy and LaSh to maybe play a Slink plus Burgrave Palace build. It would be a cheeky way of playing this, but if they want to pull something surprising, I think this could be a go-to strategy.
Yeah, I mean, this would definitely be a shock value tactic. Definitely. And on a map like Hill and Dale, also, where scouting your opponent can get a little difficult if they're able to wall up those little open areas where the hills actually have, depending on where the spawn is, maybe you don't scout the Burgrave if LaSh decides to go with the Burgrave. So but before you're trying to get your trade route, Chinese is on 2TC Song. They're just doing their own little solitaire thing as well. Before you know it, you have 9 or 10 Castle Age men-at-arms at your doorstep. So there's a potential of that happening, you know. For Hill and Dale, it gives you the ability to be greedy, but I think indirectly and transitively, it gives you more of an opportunity to get punished for it.
Well, we just have 40 seconds left to go. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up today, because as you see, we have this first semifinal going on right now. PuppyPaw and LaSh versus LoueMT and YUIMetal. We are going into game number 3 of this best of 5. After that, we will be showing you the whole series of Marine Lord and Alyona versus Beastie and Fiege. That is going to be from recorded games to allow both teams to have the same amount of preparation and rest time before the grand finals. And after that, we will be showing you the grand finals here at the Afreeca TV channel of EGC TV. So there is a lot more Age of Empires to be had, and I think this is the moment where we can shout out some of the other teams that have participated in this event. We have seen some spectacular games and a lot of very close sets. The lineup of teams here in the semifinals could be very different if just some small things go differently in the sets that we have seen in the previous days.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Lidakor. These were not, the majority of them were not 3-0 quote-unquote blowouts. You know, especially from the series that we casted yesterday. There could have been some of these small little events in a random game 2 or random game 3. One particular decision from one of the players can cost you the series, and for how close those series really are. You know, we could be seeing some different faces. We could be seeing some different hair swoops as well.
With that being said, we are jumping into game number 3 of the semifinals. Here it is YUIMetal and LoueMT versus PuppyPaw and LaSh. The score is 1-1 right now. We're jumping into Hill and Dale, as we will have on the eastern side of the map, Puppy and LaSh with the Chinese and the HRE. To the other side, it is the Chinese as well in the hands of LoueMT, but it will be supplemented by the Mongols of YUIMetal.
Yeah, and I think with this spawn, as we're watching all of these players kind of develop and matriculate their way to Feudal Age, let's take a look at these hills that are here and the dale betwixt them. Now, these hills that I have seen, that's probably the most part of the RNG of this map, right? Because the hills are going to be developed in a different, the multitude of different ways. Both of these hills, Lidakor, are actually pretty open. There's 2 areas of entry where I have seen some hills that just have 1.
The other thing that's interesting to look at is how tiny the inside, that neutral ground, is in between the 2 players. These hills are massive, as you said. It's not like you have that little corner and then most of the map is that open playground. It's more like, hey, I have my gigantic hill, you have your gigantic hill, and there is a tiny bit of space for us to play in the middle of the field.
Yeah, and that really is how this map ends up getting played, and especially in a 2v2 setting. Now, we do know the changes to Hill and Dale in the 1v1 setting. A lot of these players end up having to venture out a little bit more, but it becomes a little bit on your hill, but you become a little bit wood starved, right? So you have to venture out to try to get some of those forests. I do see from both players here getting a little bit cheeky in the Dark Age. LaSh as the HRE, actually going with a Dark Age barracks and adding some spearmen. Maybe he's potentially thinking that he could get tower rushed by a Mongolian player or something like that, where YUIMetal does have an Uvu down, does have a stable, and is churning out those early horsemen.
A lot of mind games to be seen over here. We talked about this when you look at these 2 civilizations. Unless the Mongols are trading, the eco-escalation will be a lot faster for LaSh and Puppy with their civs. So you want to do some early damage or early harassment with the Mongols here. What's the response from LaSh? He's going to go early Spearmen to counter the spears from his opponent. So YUIMetal is going to play into the Horsemen. Now, LaSh will be able to protect the base with the spears as long as he can take a fight. But that won't be granted to him. YUIMetal will just try to run circles, try to slow down walls, maybe even harass villagers that are building this Barbican.
Yeah, and I think harassment is exactly what we're going to see. I think PuppyPaw got a little bit greedy on that Barbican because he only sent 2 villagers in that department. I mean, you don't want to give a lot of idle time to traverse your way around the hill to build that Barbican. LaSh's spearmen were actually moving to the west to try to disrupt either the Chinese or the Mongolian player on that side. Has to back up, goes north. PuppyPaw knows that he's going to be safe with some of these spearmen. And if you're YUIMetal and you see HRE spearmen coming out of the gate 3 minutes into the game, I would be absolutely floored.
I would love to see that if I was the Mongol player. Sure enough, you do have the HRE bonus of food and wood generation, but it's still a big investment to make a barracks, make 4 spearmen in Dark Age for the HRE. It will delay the Aachen Chapel a bit, and you see, YUIMetal is not the last player to age up. Despite playing into a stable and despite playing into some horsemen with the Mongols, he, as expected, is going with the Silver Tree. And I would not be shocked to see some Keshik out from him. It's going to be difficult to get early trade rolling, though, because he is going to be up against these spears that will try to force engagements now.
Yeah, and they do the best they can with the mobility that they have, right? With the spearmen, they're not necessarily the fastest units in the West, so it'll be a little bit difficult, and it might be difficult if that one spearman goes down. Being dead means you move 0 tiles per second as opposed to the normal 1.25 of spearman. But for PuppyPaw, he is the first one to reach Feudal Age, is going to go with the Barbican in that area, so he is going to be safe for the time being. Now, LaSh's Aachen Chapel, this is not something that we've seen good spawns out of all 4 of these players. This Mongolian spawn hasn't been that fantastic. LaSh sees an area of raid ability, and a couple of those Mongolian peasants getting a little upset and pulling their shivs out. That spearman at about 2 health. If that con ends up tracking it down, it will be a dead spearman, and I'm sure it will eventually. So that little bit of idle time that LaSh tried to cause could end up working well for him in the future. This just goes to show, as Louis is getting that Barbican of the Sun to go up to Song Dynasty, it goes to show how good China is on this map. The ability to be defensive and the ability to be a little greedy. Having things like the Barbican of the Sun is so helpful while you're trying to get off your feet.
Aachen Chapel now complete, as we will have the Silver Tree replaced very soon by YUIMetal. He's setting up the trade early, so this is where we look at the neutral trading post spawns. They're not directly in the north and south corner of this map. They're more like offset to the side a little. Most realistic seems the one that Vodka is pointing out right now. The other one on the other side is a little too close for comfort to the base of Puppy and LaSh, so you do not really want to trade with that. But it looks like there will be little to no denial, especially initially from LaSh and Puppy, towards that trade. They've seen the Silver Tree, but they do not have any cavalry to harass it with.
Yeah, I mean, the only cavalry that we're really seeing on the battlefield right now is out of the Mongolians of YUIMetal. He has a couple of those early horsemen that are still alive and is adding Keshiks from the stable, which actually has a good synergy. You could probably expect more early horsemen just because you want to get that stable up as quickly as possible. LaSh going with a different strategy from the HRE on Hill and Dale that we've seen. We've seen some super fast castles and the like, but he's going for second town center. Lidakor, what do you think about that choice instead of fast castling?
Ooh. I could see it work. It's a tricky choice. Now, first of all, the Keshik will come in, and this town center will be delayed for quite a while. There is only 1 spearman to defend with, and this is problematic. You see, this DC is getting delayed, and the villagers, they're trying their best to fight back, but they're up against heavy cavalry, the Keshik are. Nice move from LaSh to pull back the injured villager, but this is immense value for YUIMetal. I, by default, love the 2TC build from the HRE, especially in a 1v1 setting. Maybe not so much in a 2v2 setting. But this being so delayed, it makes it a lot more problematic.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't want to sound too results oriented, because obviously LaSh did lose a couple villagers trying to get that TC up. It did get delayed. We're about 7.5 minutes in. YUIMetal now, being as the Mongolians, has that little bit of aggression. Again, sometimes the best defense is good offense. And offense might be what these Chinese brethren are doing. He's putting an archery range right in the face of LaSh's base in that secondary town center. I think we're going to see some Zugnu pretty soon.
I love this approach from YUIMetal and LoueMT. You mentioned this in one of the previous games. Offense is the best defense. Now, what do you have there if you're YUIMetal? There's a tower that's going to give you a bit of a strong point. You will have some Chukunu coming out. But this is not like a full commitment. I don't expect to see 100 Chukunu coming out with a bunch of battering rams. This is just to make the opponents respect your aggression. You have a couple of Keshik, a couple of Chukunus, maybe even a battering ram or 2. But the main focus here for Louis and Yui will be long-term eco-expansion. They do have the 2 TCs in Song Dynasty for the Chinese player. There is trade coming up for the Mongol player. That's their long-term goal. What they are doing here on the front line is more just a proxy to distract the opponent from their own main goal.
Yeah, Lidakor, I think you're exactly correct. This is a distraction tactic. And a couple of those archery ranges making Zugnu are going to make sure that the spearmen from LaSh are kept to be at bay. And it's not necessarily even getting rid of that second town center. You got to remember from the HRE, those town centers do have emergency repair. So it's going to take a decent investment to actually get one of these down. But if they're taking fights, just like you said, if they're taking fights around LaSh's base, it means that trade route is safe. YUIMetal and LoueMT already have 7 traders, all of them obviously being the way of YUIMetal, but still getting that trade up as quickly as possible. The quicker you get it up, the quicker it's going to pay off. And I really like, just based on the situation right now, this seems to be a strategy that they've practiced. This seems to be very systematic for them. And I think, hopefully, for them, it's going to pay off. LaSh is going to do something a little bit different in terms of his gold income, obviously being the HRE, building the Regnitz Cathedral, but PuppyPaw going with the astronomical clock tower at the same time. One of the things I've learned yesterday, Lidakor, is both of your civilizations going to Castle Age at the same time means you are very, very exposed. And we're seeing that there's Keshiks, there's Zugnu from YUIMetal and LoueMT starting to rain hell on this HRE province to the point where Regnitz Cathedral is going to take some time to actually get up, if it gets up at all.
Yeah, this is great value for LoueMetal and YUIMT. You see, I completely confused the names. That's the first thing that you need to notice. The second thing to notice is that these Keshik, this is heavy cavalry. They can dive underneath the town centers. They also do heal back as they do damage. And now the Chukonu commit. This is a lot of villagers getting picked off over here. They do stop some of the stables there as well. And it's 28-8 when it comes to the army department. YUIMetal and LoueMT see an opening here. They realize that both of their opponents are playing a greedy game. Basically no army, straight to Castle Age, and this is something that they're out here to punish.
Yeah, in Punish, they're doing a great job, and there's a lot of idle time from those HRE villagers. PuppyPaw trying to help out with some of those Zugnu, but again, he spent 1,800 resources doing something else. That's why the military count from both of these players is down to 4. The only way they're able to take down any of these units is from town center fire. LaSh's villagers haven't mined a gold or chopped a tree in God knows how long. Everything is idle. He is not getting any resources at all. This entire HRE province is at a standstill.
Nest of Bees now coming out, but it's completely undefended. Keshik will jump on it. Lovely move from YUIMetal to jump on the villas that were coming to repair. And the damage is just being done over here. A lot of villagers fell, both for PuppyPaw and LaSh, especially for LaSh. And they are up to Castle Age, but at what cost? They still have yet to start making some meaningful army. Now LoueMT is also on the way to Castle Age. He will directly counter the Lancers that are coming out from Puppy, or the Knights that are coming out from LaSh. And look at that, it's a Korwotai coming up as well. No food income, as Wodka is highlighting to us on LaSh's side, makes it impossible to make any Knights despite having 2 stables available.
Yeah, and I think PuppyPaw and LaSh are kind of in panic mode at this point. Army compositions haven't really developed that well between the two because PuppyPaw needed to make his own Castle Age Lancers out of the Chinese side. LoueMT obviously sees that and goes with more barracks. They're really going to push this initiative. They really smell blood in the water in this pivotal game 3, and I really like their strategy right now. Their economy has been untouched throughout the process of this, and it's good that LaSh got his Regnitz Cathedral up. It's a pretty building. We all can see there's probably a lot of thoughts and prayers that happen in that cathedral, but you don't have map control. So how many relics are you even going to put in that thing?
And it gets worse than that. Now you're also going to be facing a Castle Age army from YUIMetal and LoueMT, and they have a Korwotai coming. If they manage to get that Korwotai right next to that forward, it's going to make it very difficult for PuppyPaw and LaSh to ever counterattack this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're never going to be able to get the military production if they just have all of these raiding units just being a thorn in the side. We're going to watch that. I was going to say we're going to watch that trader tick off to see how much gold it gets, but Vodka eludes that fact from me just in time. PuppyPaw on the south side with those Lancers trying to get some damage in. He's trying to just raid his way back into the game. They know that they're behind in an economic sense. They know that they're behind in a militaristic sense. Creating idle time for your opponent means that you might be able to claw your way back into this game or even stopping the trade route. But you can see that Kurultai coming in, moving in east side, obviously not obeying the speed limit. That thing is very fast and will make its way to the front line on that eastern side where LoueMT has his military production. When you have a Kurultai there in a lot of your fights, especially right next to that HRE area where they don't like to have fights right in front of them, this could be a pivotal turning point.
It easily could be. You see now the Kashyyyk are coming out to clean up the Lancers. And I feel like if these Lancers are gone, an opportunity opens for LoueMT to pull villagers for a forward castle. He's Chinese, he can build those keeps very quickly. And that could be a great way to create an even more of a strong point here and make it next to impossible for LaSh to hold this.
Oh yeah, I mean, just based on the military that they have here, total military count 54 to 30. With what they have, they're probably not going to. And you got to remember, some of PuppyPaw's Lancer mass is trying to raid, patrolling trade routes. So they're not bringing all of their units to the front. The one thing that is really going to help them, though, the Chinese have a decent amount of foot soldiers right in front of that base. That is going to mean that Nest of Bees can really, really help you. PuppyPaw has 2 of them on the north side. So if they do take this battle, even though the Kurultai is going to help Yui and Louis, having siege superiority could help counteract it if they want to take it. What I do know from this battle and where the Kurultai actually is, they got to take a battle, and they got to take it probably sooner than they might want to, just to make sure that no Springholds are going to come out from Yui and Louis, or any kind of Nest of Bees from Louis' side. Now, those beehives starting to sting. That Kurultai going to be, if it doesn't get moved, might get damaged to the point where it might not be as useful if they're not going to try to take down those Nest of Bees. But now all of these forces are starting to conglomerate here. Yui has his Kashyyks that are getting a little bit of a heal, not because they're vampires, but because they're near the Kurultai, and the Chinese obviously going to help that Kurultai out as well. It's a 2-to-1 military advantage at Lidakor. This does not look good if they're going to take it.
Yeah, and you see Kashyyyk are flanking around. They're trying to find an angle on the Nest of Bees. They will get just that. Nest of Bees getting some damage, and more importantly, they need to push back over here. One nice volley comes out, but there's basically nothing left to defend those Nest of Bees with. The Kurultai buffed army of LoueMT is pushing forward. And as you said, the army advantage heavily in the favor of LoueMT and YUIMetal now. Looking very desperate for PuppyPaw and LaSh to scramble any army at this point. And now you have a whole army in your base. Look at that, the Kurultai is just going to park right next to the barracks. That's how confident LoueMT and YUIMetal are in their position.
Yeah, I mean, if you're the Holy Roman Empire and you have a building that's not made by the Holy Roman Empire in your base, probably not the best idea, whether it's a keep, a Kurultai, or otherwise. This does give the opportunity, if Louis wants to close this game out as fast as possible, he can put a face keep in that area, just like you said. Does have a siege workshop over here that's going to help out, not necessarily making clock tower units, but we'll be able to make some rams to try to take down these buildings. LoueMT did lose a decent amount of soldiers trying to get a raid over there on the north side. A bunch of spears, what looks like, ended up going down, and maybe some ranged mass there as well. Emergency repairs did get popped on LaSh's barracks. It just means he can't use it anywhere else. PuppyPaw trying to get a flank on that ranged mass over there on the north side. Some crossbowmen end up going down, but they have so much damage in those crossbows. Every bolt, just because they're right next to the Kurultai, means they do that much damage. Lancers end up getting evaporated from PuppyPaw. Nest of Bees are going to sting for the very last time for PuppyPaw, especially that one on the eastern side. That one gets popped. Villagers from LaSh trying to do everything they can to get out there, but they are susceptible to bee stings as well. It's almost like they're allergic. Somebody get them an EpiPen.
Now the Rams are coming out, and it's just, well, looking at the army numbers, it's getting closer, but so much infrastructure is being sacrificed here from LaSh. There might be a bit of a stall out in the momentum, though, but this is, I think, a little deceiving. Because behind this, now you have 25 traders for YUIMetal. That is going to start showing on the army department very soon. At least Puppy and LaSh will have the window to stabilize them. The army numbers are pretty close now. LaSh did lose some infrastructure, but he didn't lose a lot of eco.
Yeah, you're exactly right. A lot of his eco got pushed more to the eastern side, all the way back behind his base. It's nice that that wood line hasn't necessarily been damage to the point where it's creating a decent amount of idle time. But LaSh, probably since about 8 minutes into this game, has been on the back foot. And we just talked about that eco not getting touched very much. But Keshik's trying to get that raid over there on the south side, trying to kill a couple villagers. That Kurultai is just left by itself. And now PuppyPaw, even though he has not been touched throughout this process, they've been trying to get some Keshik's raids, trying LoueMT with a couple of units over there, trying to take down some villagers. But he has not been touched, so he's been able to make a decent amount of military and has some nest of bees as well. Emergency repairs on that second town center does get popped yet again, but again, that is a temporary repair for him. So that town center might go down eventually. Keshik's trying to get some kind of raid moving north to PuppyPaw's base, but there's just too many nest of bees, whether you're cavalry or otherwise. And now we're going to see a bee off. Look at all of those nest of bees that actually get popped by the nest of bees of PuppyPaw. Lidakor, this unit, needs to get nerfed.
Oh man, they are just raining down death and destruction. Downhill's fire. They have such a strong point over here, and you love to see how Puppy is microing his spear right next to it. They need to make sure that the Keshik cannot jump them. As long as they do have those nest of bees, it's going to be difficult for YUIMetal and LoueMT to push into this. I think we are not seeing the big picture though. I think there has to be a reason why this push stalled out so much. And I think it's because there was a farm transition behind this for LoueMT. I do not think that it is there for PuppyPaw. Yeah, you see pasture transition as well for YUIMetal, full farm transition for LoueMT. And if that's not there for PuppyPaw, which actually seems to be the case, there will be a window once again for LoueMT and YUIMetal to exploit. That's why their push stalled out. This is why we always talk about how important the timing of farm transitions are. If it comes at an uncomfortable time, it will stall out your push because you will be spending your wood on farms and not siege weapons. And that is exactly what happened over here. Push stalls out, but I think that Yui and his team is still in a better position.
Yeah, I agree. Just because of how shored up that economy is, we talk about some of the weak points in China, and one of them is that greenery transition, just like you alluded to. What's nice is PuppyPaw does have enough nest of bees where if he did want to delay some of that production, he will have the ability to. But he's got to go out and get some of those outside Gaia resources for some of this food, and he's going to lose some villagers in the process. So this is food that he really needed to keep up production of things like food-heavy units because he was making a decent amount of Lancers. Now you can see in the queue, the only thing that PuppyPaw has right now is some siege. He's got a lot of nest of bees, which is obviously going to help you. But in terms of a front line for those nest of bees, he's going to have to rely on LaSh while he's doing a granary transition. And as we all know, LaSh has been beaten and battered throughout the duration of this game.
Yeah, more importantly, you do have the mobility advantage of these Keshik. Now they try to flank around. Stone walls will come in here from PuppyPaw. But he does get forced away from that gold mine. Luckily for them, they do have quite a lot of gold on top of their hill. But here come the Springolds, and those are being buffed by the Kurultai. We got quite a few Springolds on the other side as well. But at this point, if you're LoueMT and YUIMetal, you probably are fine sniping down a couple of those nest of bees and then charging in with the cavalry just to deal with the rest.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see now with how many nest of bees there are, how powerful they can really be. I mean, we see a lot of Springolds from Louis. It looks like he's got 4 in the queue, so have just about 8 total. LaSh getting cheeky with his own Springolds. Does a little kiss on one of the other Springolds from LoueMT, and one going down. That's pivotal, especially when you're playing against a China player that does have clock tower siege. You need extra Springold bolts to pop one of those. You can see LaSh makes 3 Springolds perfectly because he knows that's the amount to take down either a clock tower Springold or a clock tower nest of bees. But now with all of these beehives, if for any Americans in chat, happy 4th of July, because this is a firework display.
It indeed is. 12 nest of bees out there for PuppyPaw. Army numbers are looking a lot better for YUIMetal and LoueMT, and it is Louis who is going up to Imperial first with the Great Wall Gatehouse. But with the AoE damage that all those nest of bees have, you're extremely hesitant to charge into this if you are Louis or Yui. But you do have the trade going. In fact, we will see... Is that going to be Imperial Age for PuppyPaw? We might be looking at his resources. Bit of a flank with the cavalry. They do run into the spears, though. I don't know about this fight. I feel like this is a waste of the cavalry here.
Yeah, if I'm YUIMetal, I mean, obviously you're trying to get some raids, which is a good idea, but you got to think, just because of how much siege that PuppyPaw and LaSh have, having spearmen obviously is a fantastic way to make sure cavalry doesn't get to that particular area. Now, we talked about the shore up of the economy with the granary transition and the like. There's a reason why there's one particular team that's going Imperial Age and there's one particular team that is not. LoueMT does get his Great Wall Gatehouse on the middle where that second Sacred Site is. Sacred Site timer is now starting to tick down. That Great Wall Gatehouse is essentially a no-go zone just because of the ability of the damage that it can do. YUIMetal on the other side going for the White Stupa and will be getting his pastures a little bit buffed in that regard. PuppyPaw trying to neutralize one of those Sacred Sites, stop that timer from happening. But again, we talked about the little bit of spearmen all the way back in Feudal Age. And I'm going to allude back to this big fight. Oh my goodness, all of those Nest of Bees are trying to get some stings off, and they are doing a good, decent amount of damage around those Keshiks, but the Keshiks were able to get a surround. I don't think there were enough spearmen from PuppyPaw and LaSh to create an entire surround. There were about 7 to 8 Nest of Bees that ended up going down for PuppyPaw and LaSh. And now with LoueMT, now that he's changed Dynasty, we have a lot of those Palace Guards that are essentially Knights, and how quickly they're able to go. Siege superiority big in the YUIMetal and LoueMT area. If you don't have as many Nest of Bees, you're not going to be able to destroy things in a single volley. They're really good in numbers. LaSh trying to repair some of the last Nest of Bees that PuppyPaw has. It's not going to happen. There's too many Springolds from LoueMT. And even though PuppyPaw and LaSh had the high ground, it looks like they took a disastrous loss in this fight. PuppyPaw trying to get this Great Wall Gatehouse up as soon as possible. If Yui and Louie are able to deny this gatehouse, that could spell the end, but it looks like just because Chinese villagers, you swear they have a couple extra hands because of how quickly they're able to build things, they might be able to get this up in time, Lidakor.
That tower with the Springald emplacement might have saved this. There was a Nest of Bees at like 1 HP crawling towards those wills. If that fires a volley, supported by these Palace Guards, I think they could have stopped the landmark. Nest of Bees goes down though. Still, it is 2 Imperial Age players against just 1. Army numbers still looking better for LoueMT and YUIMetal. And critically, they have all the key upgrades they need for these Palace Guards. You see, they will get the surround on those Nest of Bees. Although it looks like they will just ignore them after all. They just march towards the eco. That strong position is still there for LoueMT and YUIMetal. And it's the momentum that they had. It's the momentum that they built throughout this game off the back of that economy. And they just keep grinding down their opponents more and more. First, that army of Nest of Bees. Now it's the villagers. And it's getting better and better for LoueMT and YUIMetal.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I was going to allude to before that big battle took place. Obviously, PuppyPaw spent a lot of time on that granary transition, but a lot of those villagers are going to be going down, which is huge. It just means you can't make the units that you need to. You can't consistently pump Palace Guards like Louis is doing if all of those rice paddies are empty and devoid of villagers. So that's going to be huge in terms of the military production. YUIMetal now that oh my, look at all this gold, Lidakor. Oh my, is this the Malians? Are we watching Mansa Musa himself just get all of this gold? He's got about 3,000.
That's gonna help a lot over here to just finish this game. Their army is still somewhat non-existent. He's slowly building up some Kashik. A couple of bombards are coming out. But at this point, they actually have... Do they have the sacred sites? No, they do not have all 3 sacred sites. One of them on the northern side has been decapped. So they're not playing into that win condition. They're definitely playing for that conquest win. I think if they take a couple of moments to regroup, they will have insane momentum. Partly because LaSh is still in Castle Age. If you go heavy on the Palace Guards, get a couple of bombards out, it could work. LaSh now on the way to Imperial. He is going up with the pass of Schwabia. It's not like they're that much behind in eco though, so it's not a matter of recovering in terms of economy. It's gonna be a matter of getting those culverins out.
Yeah, he is the only civilization that's going to be able to pump out culverins, which is obviously going to have a big deciding factor in a lot of these Imperial fights. You're talking about, instead of sacred sites, just doing something like conquest and some of those elite. This is actually a huge raid, a lot of villager idle time, whether you have funny hats or otherwise from the Chinese Imperial age villagers, they are going to have to walk in the opposite direction. Great Wall Gatehouse only has a couple nest of Vs, but you can see how dastardly that damage really is just because of how quick those palace guards are. They just run right through it, and I don't think maybe one of them went down. That was pretty much it. LoueMT now with that safe food transition, that granary transition, he is going to be able to go wherever he wants with these palace guards. And one of the things that I wanted to allude to before we see some of these big raids and those palace guards going into the Palace of Swabia is they can just raid them to death, and they can do more of a war of attrition. They have to get those little wood patches all the way in the back, and even those areas are getting raided. This is very bad for PuppyPaw and LaSh, and it looks like PuppyPaw trying to get claws way back in the militaristic sense. A lot of spearmen of the elite variety are matching up against those Keshiks, some hand cannoneers in the back. That's a lot of wasted cavalry units from Yui and LoueMT, but there's a lot of dead villagers over here on the back end. There's no help. There's only a couple crossbowmen from LaSh over there on the eastern side. So if you're surrounding that Palace of Swabia, and that Swabia is an area where there's not a lot of outposts around it, there's not a lot of defensive structures, it just means every villager that pops out, yeah, you're getting one every 5 or 6 seconds, but you're losing one every 2 to 3.
It's also the map control now. They're confined into their bases. YUIMetal has lost a lot of cavalry here, but one thing that they accomplished is that they have confined the enemy into their base. Puppy and LaSh, they are starting to run low on resources inside their base, and they are taking heavy casualties here. Hand cannoneer numbers are starting to rise though, but it looks like we will have hand cannoneers coming as well from the Mongols player over here. It is YUIMetal who's going to mix them in.
Yeah, and he has the ability to do so because he's been stocked on 50-some traders for a while now. So he has a lot of gold, and I'm sure LoueMT and PuppyPaw both no strangers to gold, but you're exactly right. Just because of where those resource nodes are, this has become more of an attrition kind of war. That north gold is so very important for PuppyPaw. That gold in the middle, there's about, I want to say, there's an 8K gold node and a 4K gold node in the middle between both of them, but that is going to run dry pretty soon. You want to get to those outside areas before you can be safe in your base. But looking at how many red flashes are on the mini-map, Lidakor, I don't care where you are on the map with these elite palace guards and how fast they are, you're just not safe.
And it's also the hand cannoneers now for YUIMetal. You see, he's still mixing in Kashyyyk. He struggled against the spearmen that came out for PuppyPaw as a response. Now he's adding his own hand cannoneers. So this force, this could be a straight-up assault force, but it is also functional as just a raiding party. You pick off the spears, as he's trying to do right now, and when most of the spears are gone, you can still commit the Kashyyyk.
Yeah, as long as you make sure some of your Kashyyyk are going to be healthy, it really means that you're able to take down not only that wall that's there, you're able to take down the hand cannon mass that's behind it. The hand cannoneers from YUIMetal actually did a really good job of evaporating a lot of those spearmen, and it means that right behind that wall is where Puppy's granaries and food economy is. You can see where some of those rice paddies are. There's one gold mine that's kind of safe. It's not safe anymore. A lot of those spearmen that IO will probably end up going down. The Keshiks, just because of their ability to have lifesteal, will siphon the lifeblood out of those Chinese villagers. That gold mine has to get vacated. The granaries and all of these rice paddies have to get vacated as well. PuppyPaw says there is no way of coming back from this. I'm done.
That's the game called over here. Puppy and LaSh will take the loss over here. And when you look at this game, it all came down to how map control and economical dominance was established by YUIMetal and LoueMT. Right from the get-go, they had that forward position. That position was threatening for LaSh and Puppy, and they had to respond to it. For a moment, it seemed like this game was going to be quick. You had a strong commitment in early Castle Age from Louis and Yui to push into the base, but then Puppy and LaSh were able to stall that out. Still though, you had an untouched Mongol trade for most of the game, supported by a fully boomed Chinese player, and the end result is a dominant late game and a win for Yui and Louis.
Yeah, really impressive game 3 out of both of these guys, but you got to remember, the series is not over. Lidakor, LaSh, and PuppyPaw still have a way to claw back. There could be a potential of 2 games left but Yui and Louis are on match point to the finals right now on this game 4. And basically, for how dominant they were in this game 3, they stole that momentum right back.
Looks like we don't have the upcoming map just yet. Puppy and LaSh have the option to choose their own home map, that is Cauldron, or they can opt to go for the home map of their opponents, Rocky Canyon, and then leave their own home map, Cauldron, last. It's an interesting mind game to think about, because if you are in the perspective, or if you're in the position of Puppy and LaSh, you do have to consider that you have to win both games anyways. Might as well start with Rocky Canyon and make the decider on a ground that's more favorable to you, instead of using up your possibly best map for game number 4 and then having to play on the opponent's side of the field for the decider game.
Yeah, I kind of like that strategy as well. I mean, we talked about it being a marathon. We are probably in mile 15 of the marathon right about now. But actually, what it looks like is hit them going against your initial strategy. They are going to be playing on Cauldron, and this is the first time we're going to see Malians.
And I think we have the same lineup of civilizations used up as well by both teams. So we now know the matchup for the final game. And boy, oh boy, would that be a French and English mirror.
There would be quite the amount of aggression in a French and English mirror. So I kind of hope we do have the ability to see that. But now with Cauldron, this is not a map. Actually, sometimes this is not a map that's picked in a lot of these map drafts. Usually we'll see some Dry Arabia or maybe even some mountain clearing or something like that. So Cauldron, this is probably only the second time I've seen Cauldron over the weekend. Malian's obviously a good pick on Cauldron just because that little bit of water that's there in the middle of the Cauldron, that little bit of witch's brew that is still in there. It's got some fish in it. Malians do a good job of getting a dock up there. They could use some transport ship shenanigans even to try to get a little bit of a foothold in that area. I really like PuppyPaw and LaSh's civilizations right now, going up with the Mongols and the Malians, because it's going to help you deter any kind of dock that your opponent is going to make.
We don't have a countdown just yet here on game number 4. Again, to repeat what we have mentioned before, Beastie and Fiage will take on Marine Lord and Iona after this semifinal that is going to be from recorded games. They are playing right now as well, so both of the teams that get into the grand finals will have sufficient time to prepare and rest. And after that, we will take a look at a best of 7 grand finals. It is Cauldron. As you said, momentum seems like it's on the side of LoueMT and YUIMetal, but just like we have seen for many other sets in the previous rounds, you feel like either of these teams are capable of taking down the other and getting into the grand finals.
Oh my god, absolutely. These two teams, you can tell how evenly matched that they are. You saw in game number 1, it looked like that snowball effect of the Delhi Sultanate that Louis and Yui had were able to kind of create that avalanche and take game 1. That momentum, I thought it was going all for Louis and Yui. I was like, I don't know how you come back from this one. That was kind of devastating. But PuppyPaw and LaSh just licked their wounds. They came back game 2 in that Roos versus Abbasid mirror. PuppyPaw playing Abbasid like he does, tied up that series. Game 3 went the way of Louis and Yui. This is textbook back and forth. Lidakor, I have no idea how this game is going to be played, because it seems like whoever doesn't have the momentum is who's winning the next game.
Well, a lot comes down to how you use the Mongols here. You have that early aggression civilization, something that in combination with the Malians could secure the pond for you. On the other side, you do have the HRE, which we have seen how efficient it could be on a map like Mountain Clearing. Cauldron is somewhat different from that map, but they do share some similarities, like for instance having a confined space and a smaller playing ground. So as much as HRE can be efficient on a map like Mountain Clearing, it can also be a powerhouse on a map like Cauldron.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you have those confined areas like a Mountain Clearing or like a Cauldron, it just means your chapels are the best chapels that you can make. You're probably the worst chapel's going to be a 7 out of 10, you know, when you get all of the resource nodes that are around it, if they are that confined. Obviously, in mountain clearing, you have a couple of relics on in your backyard, essentially. Cauldron, not necessarily as confined as something like mountain clearing, but definitely with HRE, they could be a powerhouse in Feudal, to the point where you talk about in a 1v1 setting, because you talk about how LaSh went for a second TC as HRE. Do you think that has play on a map like Cauldron too?
Maybe. I think a lot comes down to the initial few minutes, how much damage the Mongols can do, how set back the HRE could possibly be. I think a lot of the strategies that you have with the HRE on confined maps like mountain clearing do translate into Cauldron as well. In particular, I'm very intrigued about emergency repairs. I think on very small and confined maps, that ability for the HRE is even more powerful than it is on an open map setting.
Yeah, no, it definitely can be. We saw a little bit of emergency repairs coming into the last game on Hill and Dale, but I think those emergency repairs are more of a desperation than anything else and didn't get much in the way of payoff. So yeah, maybe with Louis and Yui, we see a little bit of that. But you got to remember, on a map like this one, we still have the main talking point of any map that has this is the little bit of water. And HRE being in the Dark Age, even though they do have, you know, that confined area, maybe a little less rateability HRE, we talk about how much they like to play solitaire and like to be left alone. They might have to force the issue just a little bit, kind of like how LaSh did in Dark Age with the barracks and with some spearmen, because your teammate is probably going to be out there trying to make a dock. And if you don't have any kind of military units to try to help supplement that, it just means you're not going to have a dock.
That's a big thing, right? And when you look at this matchup, it's all about how the other civilization supplements the Malians. What can the HRE do to help the Malians, especially early to mid game? Once you get to late game, it's a different story, but it's about how you can support that Malian player. And when you look at the Mongols, it's obvious. They do have that Dark Age aggression potential. That secures you the pont potentially. That opens up opportunities to harass the opposing Malian player, possibly torch down some houses on the pit mine. So the HRE player has to do something to respond to this. And as you mentioned, Dark Age Spearman can be a thing. You do have the Prelate as well that you can heal your Spearman with. But if you commit to the healing with the Prelate, that means that you won't be buffing your eco unless you make a second Prelate.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. Not having that Prelate back home just means your villagers don't have the power of Christ behind them, and they're going to be just normal villagers. So you do give up when you do make a Prelate. The only way you're able to make it is out of that town center. So you're going to lose a little bit of villager production as well. It just means that if you are going to go ahead and pull that Prelate, it means it better pay off. So you can come back on an economic sense. You can even pull that Prelate back. You can throw it back into the chapel. So we'll see. I think this is the one player, whoever's playing HRE, that's really going to dictate how the Dark Age ends up being played and how the Feudal Age is getting played. And I'm looking at the timer, and we don't have one anymore, Lidakor. So enough of our predictions and stalling. Let's get this overlay initiated. Let's head into game 4.
Indeed, we're jumping into game number 4 in a matter of seconds. We have Puppy and LaSh facing a match point opponent, LoueMT and YUIMetal, two players that ever since the tournament was announced, ever since the teams were announced, were anticipated to finish at a very high position. They are one game away from getting into the grand finals. It is YUIMetal and LoueMT with the cold colors, having the HRE and the Malians under their command. And on the other side, Puppy and LaSh will have the Malians and the Mongols to the southern part of the map with the color red and pink.
Yeah, both of those Malian players spawning across from one another. So they might be trying to hit both the same side, that western side of the Witch's Brew. That's there for PuppyPaw. I do see that little red marker, so it looks like a dock is going to get placed. All 4 players know that docks are coming out from both sides. Scout Khan going over there, making sure that that Malian other dock doesn't go. But LoueMT only brought one villager. That second one had to come back a little bit later. Two villagers from PuppyPaw are going to be able to get their shivs out and really try to create some damage. PuppyPaw's scout on the eastern side has a lot of damage taken to it, so it has to back up. Villager goes down for LoueMT. Even though one villager might not be that big of a deal, when you're in the first minute of the game and you drop a vill, that's actually catastrophic.
It's huge. It's about denying that dock. PuppyPaw and LaSh knew very well that the dock was coming up, and they just sent two villagers from PuppyPaw to kill the vills with. They managed to pick one, though let's not forget that the villager count is dead even right now, so there's a lot more to this than it meets the eye. But they are delaying this dock quite heavily here. Once again, villagers will be focusing down the one that's building the dock. I don't think it would finish on time if this villager committed to it. And this is something that Louis knows as well. Villagers will be pulled back, and look at that. Dock was completed, transport ship is out, villagers will hop inside, and this is looking really good to start for Puppy and LaSh.
Yeah, I mean, that was the important thing about taking the fight to LoueMT's dock. It means your dock was going to get up sooner. PuppyPaw pulled another villager over there to get that dock completed, and you can see it's nicely gathering some of the shoreline fish. And look at the choreography from both of these guys as well. From the transport ship, the Mongolian Khan was in there too. Whether it's a Malian boat, a Mongolian boat, they're just making sure that they have as many arrows as humanly possible that they can really do. Now, YUIMetal didn't provide much help in that battle. There was only one scout, that HRE scout, that was helping him. So his Feudal Age timing is not going to be delayed. He will get that Aachen Chapel up right next to a deer patch and that wood line. Now, when he gets to Feudal Age, having access to some of those Feudal Age units, maybe they could take this water back.
One of the key things to look at is that despite having that transport ship on the shoreline and firing on the villagers, not a lot of villagers were killed from Louis. I think he lost like 1 or 2 maximum. They are down by 3 eco, but it's a little deceiving because of the fishing ships and everything. But at the end of the day, he didn't lose some very low HP villagers out there, which obviously helps immensely. Spears are now coming out for LaSh to harass this dock with. But you see, as long as the transports are nearby, this is going to be just an even trade of arrows. At least, however, PuppyPaw does have a working fishing ship, unlike his opponents.
Yeah, because LoueMT had to garrison that one in order to get healed, and it's so funny how all of these civilizations, all these players are just trying to scrounge units up to get. It's literally all hands on deck on these transport ships. The more that you got in that transport ship means the more arrows that you can really fire. And right now it's 6-5. A villager goes down from PuppyPaw. Maybe a little bit of a miss micro in that regard. So it's 5 arrows to 6 arrows. Now YUIMetal first one to get to Feudal Age. PuppyPaw got to use some of those fishing boats to heal up the transport ship. Just that passive dock healing is not going to be enough for how much it is. And LoueMT actually pulling his villagers out of the transport ship and healing it up to pretty much full health. I think YUIMetal is doing the right thing here and adding an archery range, having some archers to kind of help repel that transport ship as well, and create a little bit of problems with some of the fishing economy that they're trying to get is going to be huge.
LoueMT is playing without a pit mine, by the way. He is not even focusing on a pit mine, he's just focusing on this dock. But as you said, Yui is the first one to go into Feudal Age. He does have the Aachen Chapel. That's going to buff him a lot. And when these first couple of archers arrive, they can start swinging the battle in their favor. That would be very much needed because now LaSh is on the way, and boy oh boy is he aging up with the Silver Tree.
He is going up with the Silver Tree. There are neutral trading posts on this map, both on the western and eastern side. Now, when he goes up to the Silver Tree, it creates another dynamic as well, because not only could he do things like make archers if he wants to, but he would be able to make things like Keshiks that would help. LoueMT, though, the units that he has in his transport ships when he's actually using his arrows all happen to be villagers. Do you think that can create some problems as we get later into this game just because of the idle time?
Yeah, you look at Louis' eco, it's very feeble. The fishing ships aren't really working. As you said, most of the units inside this transport are basically villagers. He doesn't have a pit mine. He's kind of stuck in Dark Age over here. At least he's now focusing down some of those weak fishing ships. He actually bails out on this one before a fishing ship sinks. This is just one scuffle here in the middle, but yeah, as Wodka is pointing out, all that Louis is doing right now is chopping wood, getting some more fishing ships going. He has reached a point where he cannot even produce villagers because he doesn't have the food income for it.
Yeah, and I think this is something, I mean, we're going to see it in the economic count, right? PuppyPaw and LaSh are going to be a little bit higher. PuppyPaw didn't have to go all in like on the amount of villagers that LoueMT has to put in his transport ship. And the reason why is because his teammate is the Mongolians. What are the units that are in that transport ship? A lot of them end up being Mongolian spearmen. You can put the Khan in there as well. Maybe he does have a couple villagers, but he does have villagers that are going to be able to go up with the Mansa Quarry. Now, YUIMetal, with that archery range, does have a decent amount of archers, has 6 total, 4 in that little skirmish, trying to create a little bit of idle time for PuppyPaw, and it means if he can idle this wood line, he can't repair that transport ship.
I'm starting to wonder if this is an all-in for Louis to allow Yui to get to Castle Age. At this point, it feels so suicidal that you are sacrificing everything that you have for your teammate to do something behind this. Because YUIMetal wasn't really helping out much recently. He's got a couple of archers, that's all. It is not something that justifies you sacrificing your entire food eco, you sacrificing the entire longevity that you could have. You see, they are using this transport very well. They will repel the Kashyyyk. But I feel like unless we are seeing something phenomenal here from Yui, I just feel like this all-in is going to be way too costly from Louis.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be some sort of payoff, especially if you're giving the HRE time. He's got to get to Castle Age, and he's got to get there as soon as possible. But he's starting to make a lot of units. He has a barracks. He has a couple archery ranges. With LoueMT still being in Dark Age, even though he has a full transport ship, that's going to be a lot of arrows. PuppyPaw can make actual military ships. And you see one that will be coming out of the dock very soon. It's going to be a spring-oiled ship or an attack ship, and it'll be able to rain a lot of damage onto that transport ship. He's trying to get us around. I don't think that transport ship is anywhere to go. It has to ungarrison a lot of those units, but he does pull some of those villagers out in order to repair the transport ship and taking out a couple fishing boats. At the same time, PuppyPaw getting a demo ship, trying to take out this transport ship. I don't know if it's going to hold.
That is some terrific micro by Louis. He's been jumping in and out of that transport ship for the last 1 minute. He sunk like 6 fishing boats without losing a single ship. As much as I was kind of bashing Louis for the all-in strategy that he chose, his micro here was 12 out of 10. It is an unbelievable quality of a micro. Now he sinks a transport, he's going to start picking off the spears, and he's actually beating combat ships with a single transport.
Yeah, because that's fair, right? For Mali transport ships, taking out attack ships. PuppyPaw actually going to be trying to make another one, but that transport ship, just like you said with the micro, that transport ship still being on the shore means, look, villagers pop out, and they're not even going to repair the transport ship this time, Lidakor. They're actually pretty pissed off, and they're going to take their torches out, and they're going to try to burn down this dock at a time when PuppyPaw, he does have a demo ship in the queue. He's got about 6 seconds. We'll see if this dock, it is going to end up staying up, but we'll see how much demo damage he's actually able to get with it.
And there is the Regnitz Cathedral coming from Yui. As I said, he needs to contribute more. Few archers and few spears, if he stays in Feudal, doesn't make a lot of a difference, although these archers have been instrumental to the success of securing the spawn. You see, the demo has even been cancelled. Now it's once again started, but it's too late. It looks like the dock will burn down. I feel like as bad as the position of Louis and Yui was a couple of minutes ago, the way that they use this transport, it possibly have salvaged the game for them. Castle Age is on the way, though. You gotta be cautious. The Regnitz is in the corner, and I think it could be intercepted by the Kashyyyk.
Yeah, I think LoueMT's micro kind of saved him. That Regnitz Cathedral all the way in that northern corner. Oh my god, he's got to cancel it. That Regnitz Cathedral just turns into a lowly foundation. Villagers are trying to run for their lives. Keshik's trying to get a surround. do get a Vil kill, gets another one. Spearmen are going to be able to try to help over there on the south side. They do good damage against some of those Keshiks, but it's just the amount of Spearmen that are there. We'll see if there's actually enough. There's only 3 now. They're going to end up going down with Keshiks still remaining. There's about 5 or 6 left, a lot of them being at full health. YUIMetal going to be trying to get that Regnus Cathedral up yet again, while LoueMT is just now going up to Feudal Age with the Saharan Trade Network.
This was such a lovely piece of mind game. If you think about the Regnitz Cathedral placement, as we once again have LaSh committing under the town center to pick off a couple of villagers as it is being built, that Regnitz was placed in that corner to hide it. If you place it right next to your TC, it is guaranteed to go up. Yui wanted to hide it away from the aggressors, but he paid a huge price for it. It was cancelled, it was delayed, they've taken massive casualties. But you do have a Castle Age HRE player now. He's the only Castle Age player. And LoueMT also reached Feudal Age, ecos still being pretty even. This game is far from over.
Yeah, at a time when Dark Age, we thought it was going heavily on the side of PuppyPaw and LaSh, not so much anymore. And now PuppyPaw is trying to create a lot of damage with some Feudal Age units. He has a lot of Javelin Throwers over here. I love the pick of Javelin Throwers because if you had a transport ship that was full, there's a lot of ranged armor. Louis actually makes a demo ship. He's looking for something, but it just turns into a very impressive firework display.
Yeah, now the fishing boats are being shut down. If those fishing boats go down, the eco differential is going to be much larger in the favor of Puppy and LaSh, and they do have momentum with the Kashyyyk as well. Not only was the Regnitz Cathedral cancelled, so were the stables. Yui wanted to go to Lancers, he's yet to get the first night out. You feel like the strategy is easy to understand when you look at Yui and Louis. You have LoueMT full committing, setting up YUIMetal to get to Castle Age and then start playing with Lancers. But the delay that was caused on them by LaSh and Puppy seems to be more and more difficult for them to overcome.
Yeah, I think the one thing that they didn't necessarily plan for is the fact that LaSh, with his Silver Tree, he does have a couple traders. He's been untouched throughout the duration of this game. He did add a couple spearmen to try to help on the water, but that was pretty much it. So he had a Feudal Age mass, and he still does with Keshiks. He's continuing to make them. There's 12 Keshiks on the battlefield right now, 2 in the queue. PuppyPaw has a lot of Javelin Throwers. He's got 20-some Javelin Throwers, starting to add some Donzos as well. Once they get to the Feudal Age variety, they'll be able to do some help against those Lancers. YUIMetal's Regnitz Cathedral is not going to pay off until they're able to break out of their own base. And with the military mass that they have right now, it's going to be more of a quality over quantity situation for them, as the Castle Age Knights from the HRE are going to do well against Keshiks from the Mongolians, but it's just about getting enough of them. You don't have the passive income from the Regnitz Cathedral because of the fact you don't have any relics. Your villagers are continuing to get raided. I thought that was a little bit of chop through on the south side, but there's that one bare naked tree that's preventing that from happening. With prelates are going to come back and start to pull relics, it just means they're going to end up getting killed. But one of the things that might turn the tide in terms of military count, Lidakor, is the fact that LoueMT is now going up to Castle Age. Before PuppyPaw he went for more of that feudal aggression with all of the Javelin Throwers. LoueMT went with the Farimba Garrison, says, I'll catch up in military eventually, you just got to give me a little bit of time.
Pressure is mounting up over here, but there is Castle Age for LoueMT. That needs to salvage the game for them, but it won't. YUIMetal is just going to tap out of this one. He was under so much pressure, and this was the story in the entire game. It was a 2v1 all the time. Whether it was on the pond, whether it was in the base of YUIMetal, it was a 2v1, and the opponent, they just steamroll you while your teammate is setting up the next step. I think everything that we have seen from YUIMetal and LoueMT were just a little delayed. The Castle Age, how the Regnitz Cathedral was delayed, the appearance of the Knights, now the Farimba Garrison, also before that the Feudal Age from LoueMT. These things were delayed, and that is something that PuppyPaw and LaSh have exploited well.
Yeah, I mean, it goes to show, I think, in this particular game, just because it's PuppyPaw and LaSh's home map, I think that they had a strategy on how to do this. YUIMetal and LoueMT did not. And first it went down to the civs in terms of picking. Maybe they're saving things like French and English, like you talked about, for the game 5 for the mirror, and they want to take it out for game 5. But HRE, it just I don't know if it just wasn't the pick here, or maybe it could have been a different strategy in order to play it. Because you're absolutely right. He was 2v1ing on that water, and you weren't going to win that.
And with that, we have one last map remaining. That is Rocky Canyon. That is the whole map of LoueMT and YUIMetal. Civilizations remaining on either side will be the English and the French. The most classic combination of a 2v2 civilization pairing. We are going to be heading to Rocky Canyon for the finale of this one. Let's quickly take a look at the brackets, because one of the things that you will see is a lot of 3-2s. This tournament does have a drafting system where the lowest seeded player picked the teammate first, and then we just went all the way up to the highest seeded player. And it did result in a lot of very close sets. 3 out of the 4 quarterfinals ended in a 3-2 fashion, and now our first semifinals is also heading to game number 5.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of had an idea that some of these series were going to get longer, especially when the quarterfinals came through and now the semifinals are underway. I mean, when you look at the round of 16 all the way to the left-hand part of your screen, maybe there's, I see 3-0s, but that's pretty much it. All of these teams had a chance and had an opportunity to be where we're at right now with the semifinals. I think there were some teams that you can kind of predict going a little bit farther. We talked about, like, before game 4 started, with LoueMT and YUIMetal being a really good team. But oh my goodness, every single one of these 16 teams we could be talking about right now, the balance that you've had in terms of the drafting, you got to give hats off to EGC for pulling off the event that they did, because these games and these series, they've been electric.
They definitely were, and we are very far from the end. We do have Rocky Canyon coming up to decide who gets into the grand finals from this part of the bracket. And then we will show you Beastie and Fiage versus Marine Lord and Aliona. That's going to be the whole set as well. It will be from recorded games, just to make sure that both of the teams that do get into grand finals will have sufficient time to prepare and rest. And it looks like we just have 1.5 minutes left to go. I'm going to ask you this again. I've asked the same question before this set. Who do you think is going to take the final game? And with that, the entire set.
Lidakor, I can't back down. I previously said PuppyPaw and LaSh were going to take this one, and I have to stick with it. I'm not going to change. This reminds me of, if you ever watch Deal or No Deal, right? Where you have 2 cases left, and they're like, do you want to switch your case? Do you sure you had that case the whole time? Do you want to make that switch? It might be mathematically advantageous to make that switch. I'm not going to. I'm still going to say PuppyPaw and LaSh are going to take this in a French and English mirror. Usually in a 1v1 situation, I'd say that it's another installment of the 100 Years' War, but both of these opponents in that war joining forces against each other. We're going to see a lot of longbowmen. We're going to see a lot of knights, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
All right, a big question. Do you see a world in which we see a kink from either of the English players? We have seen some council halls or not council halls, but the Abbey of the Kings being utilized. It was mostly to heal up friendly cavalry before, but that was usually done when your teammate wasn't playing the French, so they didn't have chivalry. Before we jump into this game, will we see any kinks here?
I have exactly 1 second, and we're going to be initiating the overlay. My answer is no.
All right.
That's it. I'm not even going to explain it.
I have that gut feeling too, but you never know, especially with these 2 teams. LoueMT and YUIMetal, they love to play out of the box. And for Puppy and LaSh as well, they know this is a mirror. We had 3 mirrors, including this one, in this entire set. It's 1 apiece right now. Do you want to gamble on playing standard, or do you have a secret hidden strategy that you're about to pop out? A strategy that possibly propels you into the grand finals? It remains to be seen as we jump into game number 5 over here, folks. It is Puppy and LaSh versus YUIMetal and Yui. No, I'm confusing players again. Come on. I should just call them YUIMetal as a team, and that would just get the pressure off of my shoulders, not to mess up their names. But it is going to be Louis and Yui to the north in the cold colors, and down south it is Puppy and LaSh.
Yep, another French and English mirror. These are, in a 2v2 situation, Lidakor, these are some of the most favorite games that I have for casting. And you're talking about a quick, little cheeky strategy, maybe going into Feudal Age. This might not be necessarily cheeky. It could be necessarily meta, because I've seen it a couple times before. PuppyPaw going with the barracks and adding some Vanguard men-at-arms. He's going to try to harass this French player who just needs to get knights and get up to Feudal Age. I love this idea.
I asked you this just before the game began. Is there a secret hidden strategy that you pop out? This is one of the most important things when you go into a tournament as a player. You need to have one or two of these hidden go-to strats. These need to be there, because if you play standard, you might end up losing a game that you could have possibly won with a secret, hidden, surprising strategy prepared. That's what I anticipated from at least one of these two themes, and I love this opening. The Vanguard Man-at-Arms, it's a unit that will slow down your access to gold, and when you look at this matchup, English versus French in a 1v1, that single Man-at-Arms is enough to push you away from gold and prevent the first knight from coming out. If you can accomplish that with the English, that means that your teammate will have the knight's advantage. And love to see the response from YUIMetal. He was prepped for this. He does have a defensive tower, so he cannot be harassed there. Means that the only place that PuppyPaw can harass is the gold mine of the English player.
Yeah, and for some of the Vanguard Men-at-Arms rushes that we've seen now, with that Vanguard Men-at-Arms now starting to get some blood on his sword, trying to take down one of those English villagers. They will have to back away from the gold. Most likely has enough to go to Feudal Age anyway. However, for those Vanguard Men-at-Arms, just the fact that they exist, and just the fact that they're present, just the fact that YUIMetal had to make an outpost and spend wood at a time when the French don't want to spend wood. They want to get their food and gold, and they want to get their knights. They want to continue on food and gold to continue that knight production, just as you stated previously. You're making them spend the wood on an outpost where they otherwise wouldn't. Just the fact that the outpost is there makes me feel like it's a win for PuppyPaw and LaSh.
The way to think about it is that in a matchup like this, everything is on the line with the knight numbers. If the English player is able to set back the opposing French player, even just... Okay, that's a council hole. For a moment, I had to think it was an Abbey, but it wasn't. Okay, so back to that point. When you look at this matchup, it's all about the knight numbers initially. If you can slow down the opposing French player by forcing out a tower even, that means that your teammate will have the knight's advantage, sets you up for more raids, and it can easily snowball out of control. That's the same way that you approach a French 1v1 mirror matchup. It's the player with the more knights that has an insane advantage over the opponent. Every knight of an advantage that you have over the opposing French player has an amplified impact.
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. And LaSh is definitely going to be the first one in terms of that knight production. His Feudal Age timing, that school cavalry just about 90 to 95% done, is impeccable. He's going to get there at about 4 minutes. YUIMetal is going to take a little bit more time in order to do that. And for YUIMetal, I'm not entirely sure in terms of his gold income if he has enough to even put a knight on the battlefield. Just like you said, in this area of the game for the French, this is when they start to turn on. And I always use this analogy for the French. The way they play and the way they win is all about snowballing. But first, you have to pack the snow. If you're getting there and you're getting a couple knights in production, you have a couple more knights than your opponent, it means you pack the snow better, you have a better snowball, it turns into an avalanche.
Exactly, that's the thing. And if you think about it, sure enough you sacrifice the Feudal Age timing of PuppyPaw, but how much does that matter? He's gonna be down by, let's say, 5 longbows. Dare I say 10 longbows. Does that compensate for your French player having way less knights? Does that compensate for your limited ability to raid? I don't think so. And look at that mining camp spot for Puppy as well. It's a very much feels-good man type of a mining camp. He is on stone right now, so he is going to be working towards second TC as well. And the first player with any knights out is going to be LaSh. He's got 2 of them on the field. Yui has 2 knights queued up, but he's yet to get a single one of them out on the battlefield.
Yep, and that's the most important thing. Now, these palings coming out for LoueMT. That Royal Knight from LaSh actually got snared a little bit with a couple damage from those palings. You gotta love it. YUIMetal just had the time to get one of those knights out. But again, we talked about how important knight count is. A little bit of a jousting fields episode from both of those knights. Second knight going to be coming in for a reinforcement, making Yui back up a little bit to the western side. It's 3 knights to 1. Somebody's doing a better job at getting knights on the battlefield, and it's because of what PuppyPaw chose to do. Now, what can he do with that? A lot of these fights now, LoueMT with his longbowman, YUIMetal with his knights, means that they have to defend their own base. PuppyPaw sends just a gaggle of villagers. There's about 13 of them over there. English can be able to make their second town center and not get punished for it, because that's a greedy place.
I love this build from Puppy. The way he sets his teammate up for success, and how he transitions into an eco-heavy approach. You see, the moment he reached Feudal Age, he had the resources for a second TC. This build was crystal clear, and you can tell that he probably fine-tuned this build like a dozen times before this tournament. This was his go-to approach. This isn't like, okay, I have a build that's pretty much designed, but there are some variables. This was a crystal clean build, and sometimes pro players have these variables in their builds, you know, how good your spawn is when it comes to the gold, how good is your spawn when it comes to other resources. But this build was very much fine-tuned for success, and I love it in a 2v2 setting.
Oh my god, yeah, you are so right. And the fact he's able to get the second town center off as quick as he did. You know, it was probably about the 6-minute area. Now, he is lacking a little bit in the longbowman count, and that's what you have to sacrifice in order to do that. LoueMT is 13 longbowmen, and you can see them traversing eastward, trying to find some areas to kill some English villagers. But a lot of his resources right now, they're not on the right side in order to get any kind of raids going, because that wood line a little bit to the northeast, and those longbowmen are going to stare right at the face of that starting town center from the English that has that MG42 machine gun about it that shoots that many arrows. Secondary town center, maybe not as much. This could be an area where he can provide some raids. Only takes down a men-at-arms. However, getting some Vil kills and stopping this food production, depending on how many he gets, could be very important. But because Louis and Yui only have 1 town center each, the fact that PuppyPaw and LaSh have more at this stage of the game, it almost makes the Chinese brethren in this game 5 kind of on a timer before things start getting out of whack.
The thing I love about this build for Puppy, I know I love this build, I said this like a dozen times, but as you mentioned, he's missing out on longbow numbers, but if there's a single civilization with which you can afford to miss out on army numbers compared to the same civilization that your opponent has, it's the English. You have the defender's advantage here with the network of castles, so right now he's more than happy being down by 7 longbows because his opponent won't have the attack buff and he will. The more alarming thing for LaSh's team, actually, is that the knight numbers are pretty much even now. So that initial advantage that LaSh had didn't really turn into much. Although this Vanguard man-at-arms is being annoying over here, but knight numbers are now looking close, and the appropriate move here from Yui and Louis is to target the French player now. As we discussed, the English attack buff will compensate for Poppy's lack of numbers, but LaSh is wide open. He could be double-teamed, and I think that's exactly the direction that Yui and Louis are heading towards.
Yeah, you are definitely correct. The French player in this side on both sides is the most raidable side. You don't have network of castles over there. YUIMetal and LoueMT obviously sense that they are working together. They're doing a great job with their synchronicity, making sure that all of those units are with each other. The longbowmen are trying to protect those knights. LaSh trying to get some outposts on this outside guy food resource. Obviously, for the French, you're not going to make farms 9 minutes in the game. You really, really don't want to. but he's got to give up on that deer patch. One villager does end up going down. PuppyPaw is going to have some reinforcements to try to help him out. Knight's trying to get a charge over there, and look at how much, just because of how many longbowmen there are from PuppyPaw, and LaSh's micro just taking the 2 or 3 Knights, splitting them across, killing some longbowmen. I think the micro was the most important part of this battle. Knight count now, as you can see on the screen, only YUIMetal with 2 Knights having to retreat, LaSh having the defender's advantage. As soon as those Knights pop out of the stables and the School of Cavalry, it means they're able to do some damage. YUIMetal trying to do the similar position that LaSh did in the initial encounter. The thing of it is, he does not have enough Knights in order to cause havoc. Lidakor, this was a huge win for PuppyPaw and LaSh, and if you listen and you look very carefully, that snow is starting to pack into a snowball.
You are looking at a highlight reel material when it comes to those battles. When you look at this game, when you look back at this series, if Puppy and LaSh end up winning, you will look at this fight and say, yeah, that was what made it happen. Terrific fight for them. Now they outnumber their opponents 2-1. Knight numbers are dead even, but they have gotten themselves momentum, and more importantly, they are the ones on multiple town centers. So they're more than happy with just the status quo of not having many fights, but it looks like they will be playing into an aggressive posturing, and it could pay off. You need to be cautious still, because while you do have a lot of longbows, we have seen what happens when the Knights disappear, but this is definitely an opportunity to do damage, and it's possibly an opportunity to finish the game and the set with.
Yeah, and I think that's really what they're doing. They are smelling the blood in the water. There are a lot of longbowmen from PuppyPaw. There weren't many that went down in that initial encounter. YUIMetal has to vacate that gold mine. There is another one over to the northwest side, so we will be able to get a little bit more. But now the defender's advantage is going to start to shift in favor of the Chinese brethren. And you're absolutely right with the town center display. I mean, the economic count, it's only been somewhere around 5 to 8 villagers throughout the duration of this game, but it has been a while since this game started. We're with the 12th, we're eclipsing on the 13th minute of this game. So it means you just have those many villagers that are producing more YUIMetal and LoueMT. Just because they lost that in first encounter means they have to spend a lot of resources on military. And now with that longbowman mass from PuppyPaw, look at the damage they're able to do against Knights. There's 35 total longbowmen in the entire battlefield for PuppyPaw. Not all of them might not be technically in that mass, but just because of how many that there are, they do have the steel arrowed upgrade. As Vodka clicked on one of those longbowmen, you can see that they're doing 7 damage. The Royal Knights do have iron undermesh, so that'll be able to help them out just a little bit. Each longbowman arrow, though, doing 3 damage. If you've got 30 to 35 of them, it's going to be a death by 1,000 paper cuts.
The key thing is the tower on the front line now. PuppyPaw doesn't want to have the same fate as LoueMT had with his longbows. There was no attack buff now. You see that the Lancers of LaSh are now pursuing the ones from YUIMetal, leaving all these longbows alone. But there's a tower over here. In fact, the second tower is going to be placed on the gold mine of YUIMetal. And as the Knights are just clashing, trading one-on-one, the longbows are creeping closer and closer, and they will have the support aura as well. Knights now from LaSh will have to be called back here. It is even numbers, but you do have to be cautious not to throw away your mass. Micro, of course, is going to be key once again. Longbows, looks like they will not come into aid from either of the supporting players.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I mean, this is the thing for the English as well, too, because they have longbowmen, and actually PuppyPaw has a barracks and is starting to make a couple spearmen to help out with the Knights of YUIMetal. But we talk about the English all the time and their longbowmen and their spearmen. They're quite the immobile army. French can dictate what battles that they want to take. English, not necessarily as much. They can sit around their outposts, make sure they have network of castles, but the French Knights are the ones that are going to be encircling around, really initiating battles. You can see that happening. LaSh is trying to get some of those charges. He does have chivalry, so he's going to get a little bit of a boost in terms of health. So as long as those Knights don't die, and this is a very important thing for LaSh and for all French players, when you have the micro, pull away some of those low HP Knights and make sure they can heal and they'll be saved for another day.
The other thing to look at is how Puppy and LaSh has this wedge cutting off Yui from Louis. At any given moment, Puppy and LaSh can combine their armies. That's nearly impossible for Louis and Yui because of those towers being there and how the longbows cannot just link up with these knights as they would have to push through the middle there. Now Castle Age is on the way for Louis. That could be a saving grace if he gets the veterancy on those longbows, if he mixes in a couple of crossbows as well. But he needs to ensure he doesn't lose these longbows, and I feel like these guys might be caught off guard over here.
Yeah, because especially with LaSh's knights that are there, if PuppyPaw has the presence of mind to tell LaSh, be like, hey, let's get over there. Maybe we can kill a couple longbowmen, but LaSh just doing more of an escorting tactic for a lot of these longbowmen and spearmen, just making sure that mass doesn't end up going down. King's Palace does get completed, which is quite interesting. I didn't expect LoueMT to be the first one to go to Castle Age. I would expect PuppyPaw to actually be that, but he is going up as well, going to be dropping the King's Palace around that wood line on the south side. But it takes taking a look at where the battles are going to end up being, exactly like you said, with them cutting off one another. They're trying to find a 2v1. Now they've actually started to join forces. It looks like LoueMT, just because he is Castle Age first, veteran longbowman, as soon as I say that, just hit. You can see the nice little shiny silver helmets that they have. They will do a lot of damage to French Royal Knights, especially in Feudal Age. So because Louis got that age up, it was a really, really good age up, because it means PuppyPaw and LaSh have to abandon that forward base that they had.
Yeah, they will have to fall back here to this expansion town center. There is going to be the network of Castle's Aura still buffing the army of PuppyPaw, though. He's reaching Castle Age. Wars are completed on the side of Puppy and LaSh, so there is a limited amount of angles from which this army can attack from. But you do not have the Castle Age upgrade on those longbows yet. You want to be cautious if you want to fight this. Puppy needs to wait for the Castle Age upgrade, and Louis knows that. Louis is now pushing up here, picking off the spearmen. Knights will clash here as the Castle Age upgrades hit for PuppyPaw.
Yeah, now with the Castle Age upgrade, there is one, if they're back by this base and by the King's Palace, those longbowmen from PuppyPaw might have network of castles that's really going to help them out. I only see some of them having that aura, some are not. Those longbowmen are doing so well against some of those knights, especially from YUIMetal. Knight counts on either side are actually particularly even. It's about 13 to 13 on each. LaSh realizes he's going to back up just a little bit because he just wants to make sure that longbowman mass is preserved. To be honest, this feels like a little bit of a stalemate between both of these guys. The knight count ended up getting devoured on either side. Longbowman mass for both of these players staying relatively healthy at about 56 apiece. But the great thing about LoueMT and YUIMetal and the position that they took for PuppyPaw and LaSh, it just means that that defender's advantage is really going to help him out. LoueMT had to back up and ended up losing a couple longbowmen in the process. So they tried to push the initiative, go for a timing attack, being the first ones to Castle Age. Didn't end up doing much of anything.
This is great for Puppy and LaSh. They have been in a stronger position economically than their counterparts were. And all that they wanted was to get rid of most of those knights that could break in and threaten the eco. The longbows cannot dive under those town centers, not when there is an even amount of longbows available for Puppy. So what do? You just pick off the knights, prevent Yui and Louis from cutting into your eco lead, and then just escalate this game to a later stage. That's exactly what we are seeing. In fact, we do have a farm transition coming from PuppyPaw as well. And the first one, actually, it's not going to be the first French player to click to Castle Age. The two French players click to Castle at the exact same moment. It's going to be the Royal Institute.
Oh, yeah, the Royal Institute is the 100% play that you need here. Making sure your knights, the one way I like to refer to these knights as pseudo-Imperial because of the way they get royal bloodlines in Castle Age. When you get up to veteran status, they're 230. With royal bloodlines, it's an extra 80 HP to 310. Those, I know we talk about Roos Rams being wandering towns, but at 310 health, they might actually get the credit for that as well. And YUIMetal trying to push a little bit of an initiative, trying to take down some of these palisade walls. LaSh is having none of it. We talked about French being the most rateable out of the English and French combo. So that's what YUIMetal is trying to do. If you can disrupt that French food production, it just means less knights that are going to get pseudo-imperialized by the Royal Institute, and it could turn the tide into a battle. And honestly, Lidakor, they need to raid their way back into this game because the economy advantage is starting. It's still creeping. It feels like Louis and Louis are hemorrhaging in that regard.
it is a little deceiving, I feel. Sure enough, there is a 20 villagers lead, but as we get deeper and deeper into that game, that lead, when it comes to relative numbers, it is going to start shrinking. Royal Bloodlines will be in at the same time for both French players, ideally. Army numbers are still dead even. Now the defender's advantage will be on the side of LoueMT and YUIMetal. And I feel like, given the army numbers, they can do the exact same thing as Puppy and LaSh did in the previous battle. Cancel out the armies and just say, look, I'm happy taking this game very long, as the knights are breaking into the enemy base. They're happy taking this game very long because in an hour-long game, the eco lead that you have right now will not matter.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you get to that post-Imperial kind of play, I can definitely see that point from you. Some of those raids by YUIMetal, even though he took down 1 or 2 villagers, it can be consequential because it means that the army from LaSh and those knights have to back up. They can't support the longbowman. The one thing that PuppyPaw does have, even though he's by himself in this area, he has the siege. He has a mangonel, and look at that economy pay off. He's able to get to Imperial Age at this point. He's definitely pop capped at this stage of the game. He is putting a Berkshire Palace. This isn't necessarily a face keep. I'll call it a neck keep or a throat keep because of how far it is next to the base. But with the range of the Berkshire, it's going to fire on everything.
Oh my lord, this could be an easy highlight moment. A lot of villagers committed to this one. Puppy and LaSh will have to stand their ground though against the men-at-arms. Mangonel at a safe position, helping out a lot against the longbows though. And it looks like the Berkshire should finish. It's gonna be awfully close though. Villagers now being focused down by the longbows. And it looks like the Berkshire will finish with just a couple of seconds left before the villagers get massacred. Such a critical, tiny detail over here. Something that could easily end the game in the favor of PuppyPaw and LaSh.
That is how close this series is. That is a microcosm of the series that we've seen so far. That Berkshire Palace had maybe 2 or 3 villagers on that side. That was the textbook photo finish, and a lot of military from Yui and Louis had to not only lose their lives because they were backing up from the Berkshire, but they had to retreat. This is a stronghold over the middle of both YUIMetal and LoueMT. So not only is it going to give them a lot of the protection and a lot of fire, but it's going to give them that bonus that they really need, that English players really need. Looks like there's a keep that's going to be coming up on the western side of this area, but I'll tell you what, Lidakor, even though he's pulling a lot of villagers to do it, that keep might go up, but it's no Berkshire.
A lot of villagers were lost over here for PuppyPaw, so much so that now he's behind on the eco compared to Louis. But don't forget, now he is in Imperial, he's going to have enclosures on the farms. His army is also going to trade very effectively. He will have network of citadels, he does have the elite status, and I'm not even sure if this keep is going up.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. LaSh coming in at just the perfect time for a little bit of reinforcements. There's a trebuchet over there of the counterweight variety that LaSh has targeted and will get popped. The longbowmen have to focus on those knights, which is really not what they want to do. PuppyPaw has elite longbowmen at this stage that can do a lot of damage, even though look at that knight just get capped by all of those longbowmen arrows. Those knights aren't going to be making much of a front line because of the elite status that they have. The men-at-arms are actually doing a better job of tanking at this point. So LaSh can send his knights in, his pseudo-Imperial knights, and that's exactly what he's going to do. He's going to try to get a charge on this longbowman mass, start to back away, just trying to make sure that the elite longbowmen from PuppyPaw end up staying alive. It seems like every knight that comes in from YUIMetal, he's only trickling them in one at a time. With a mango shot that comes in, PuppyPaw trying to dodge it and does so very successfully. Knights trying to get a surround and take it down, but look at what PuppyPaw does. He splits them off. There's a mangonel shot that comes in on the lesser group of longbowmen over there on the eastern side. That mangonel didn't do anything in terms of killing longbow, and YUIMetal, smelling desperation, puts a keep over on his western side, making sure that French province is protected. But it looks like the fields of England, and particularly those farm fields, are right in the crossfire.
And now it's looking very grim for LoueMT. He's trying to get a keep up inside his base. Mangonel does get intercepted immediately though. Eco counts are still close, but the army numbers are looking a lot better for Puppy and LaSh. 13 knights for Yui, 16 for LaSh. But more importantly, we have 50 longbows against just a handful of troops out there from LoueMT. And now you have the Imperial Age upgrades as well for PuppyPaw. The keep will be completed, but all the eco that LoueMT is having is just being shut down. I feel like desperation is starting to slowly kick in here for YUIMetal and LoueMT. And Puppy and LaSh will be awfully close to securing this series. Correct me if I'm wrong, but this might be the first time that they would lead in the entire series. It was 1-0, 1-1, 2-1, 2-2, and then this turnaround. How convenient would that be if you lead for the first time when the set is over?
Oh, yeah. It doesn't matter if you're winning throughout the duration of the series as long as you win at the end, right? And we talked about with PuppyPaw losing a decent amount of villagers trying to get his Berkshire up. Louis lost, if not the same, maybe a little bit more, trying to get up his keep. The difference is the Berkshire is the one thing that propelled him to Imperial and to get those big, strong, elite longbowmen with how much damage they are, and he's able to get elite men-at-arms as well if he wants to get that upgrade. Going to be adding in another keep over here on the French side, right next to the military production, right next to where those knights are going to start to pop out. YUIMetal knows that if this keep goes up, it could be disastrous for him. They get a good charge on some of those villagers. It looks like one villager ends up going down, but PuppyPaw's micro is insane. Look what he does with the longbowmen. He makes sure that they're around the villagers so the knights can't possibly get a surround, and Mango gets a good shot over there on a lot of those longbowmen, but that keep goes up, which is exactly what he needs. He keeps his military count high throughout that process because this is a dangerous thing to do. Put a keep up in front. That's a very difficult thing to do, and he's able to keep his military count up at the same time while he's doing it, and he's able to chase down that mangonel as well. LaSh coming in, try to provide some reinforcements. A desperation Wololo on the top side from LoueMT, trying to get at least 5 seconds of a break. He's like, I need to get some military. I need something. I don't know what I need at this point, but those 6 seconds from a Wololo might not be enough as you see a storm of English men-at-arms, which I would imagine with Iron Chad armor. Huge raid by LaSh as well over here on the western side. The farm fields, the wood line of YUIMetal. That's a lot of villagers going down. I don't think YUIMetal, I don't know where his knights are, but they're not here to help Lidakor.
Oh, he's got 14 knights, but now they're just bleeding from so many wounds. Such a forward position, such a strong point out there for Puppy and LaSh. Now they're willing to trade these armies. There are some crossbows over here from LoueMT, but they will be focused down by the longbows. Once again, the trade, or the farming eco actually, is going to be exposed. And this is more than fine for Puppy and LaSh. YUIMetal and LoueMT will tap out of this one. LaSh and PuppyPaw will be the first finalists of the Afreeca duos here at EGC TV.
Unbelievable. What an unbelievable series. It came it came down to that Berkshire getting completed. I really do think that. PuppyPaw had an amazing English build that you talked about at length, but we're going to talk about it some more with that second town center going up, getting that villager count. Look at this villager graph that you can see Vodka putting up on the screen. There's that one red line that makes all the difference. He was the one who went with that second town center and then added the third with the King's Palace, of course. He was at 100 villagers, lost a lot with the Berkshire Palace, of course, but was able to recuperate. It seems like he was the villager leader throughout the duration of this game, even though LoueMT did have the King's Palace. That Berkshire going up, providing the stronghold between these two guys. What an excellent series. What an excellent last game to really cap it on. That was the climactic finish to this series that we needed.